I am a park ranger out in Nevada. There was an old, abandoned mining town that sat a ways off the main road. The Park Service had claimed it a while back, but people were not encouraged to visit there. In fact, it was plainly marked with signs that said, off limits, no entering, danger. Hell, about the only thing they didn't do was build a moat around the place. Sometimes I wonder if they should. Some people need to learn to read or listen, one of the two, because it seemed like I was always chasing people out of there. They'd look at me like I was crazy, but every one of them would spray gravel as they hauled ass after I'd tell them the story. I'm not supposed to tell the story. I've been warned many times, even threatened with much worse than the unemployment line. I guess maybe I need to learn how to listen too, but it was the best way to make sure people left and never came back. I'm tired of being told to keep my mouth shut. I'm tired that nothing's been done about it. We rangers are supposed to just go about our jobs and pretend it never happened. Well, I believe that's the best and quickest way for it to happen again, and I never want it to happen again. It was a while ago. That's my way of saying I forget how long ago it was, but the memory's still fresh enough to tell. It was back when even I was unsure why the town was off limits. I'd heard old wives' tales and urban legends, but no one would ever commit to anything concrete. I asked around once and was told that I was better off not knowing. The old rangers would just tell me to mind my business and stay out of town, but something about it always intrigued me. I was never good at blindly following orders, so as often as I could, I'd find some excuse to drive past it. On that day it was a good thing I did, or a bad thing, depending on how you look at it. I noticed a small mobile home parked at the edge of the town. I knew it hadn't been there the day before. I pulled up behind it and got out of my truck. I scanned the area around and didn't see anything moving, that the wind wasn't blowing. I walked around the vehicle and it seemed to be in good shape. None of the tires were flat. There seemed to be no good reason for them sitting there unless they were sightseeing. I peeked in the windshield but couldn't see anyone, so I went to the side door and knocked. "Park Ranger," I said. "Anybody in there?" The wind whistling was my only answer. I knocked again. "Park Ranger, is everyone alright?" No answer. I pulled on the door latch and it opened. "I'm coming in," I said. "Just need to check to make sure everyone's okay." I pulled the door open and stepped inside. Unconsciously, I rested my hand on my sidearm. I closed the door behind me, leaving the wind outside. I looked around the camper and found plenty of food and supplies. They seemed to be well stocked for a trip. I stepped back toward the bedroom, keeping an ear open for anything. It was eerily silent. The only thing I could hear was the sound of my boots on the linoleum as I headed back the short hallway. It wasn't a long walk until I got there. The bedroom was clean and the bed had been made. I opened a few drawers and found clothes for a man and a woman. There was no sign of a struggle, so I went back out to the kitchen, stopping to open the bathroom door and find 2 kids' toothbrushes and toothpaste sitting on the sink. Just like the bedroom, everything seemed to be in its place. I noticed the hand towel holder was empty. I looked on the floor to see if it had fallen, but the towel was just gone. I shrugged it off and went back out to the kitchen. The table was still folded down into a bed, as these smaller models were known for. Scanning around, I was hard-pressed to find anything out of the ordinary, except for the fact that no one was there. I stepped outside and the sun had disappeared. It would be dark soon. I looked around, but didn't see anyone. It was as if they parked the camper at the edge of town and went for a walk. I stepped out of the camper and turned to close the door. That was when I saw it. There was a small dot of red on the step. I leaned closer and it looked like it could be dried blood. I tried to dismiss it as nothing. People drip blood every day for simple, non-threatening reasons. Nosebleeds, small cuts, general accidents. It could be absolutely nothing. But when you add in a missing family at the edge of an abandoned town that's supposed to be off limits, normal things don't look so normal. I didn't touch it in case it needed to be tested later for a DNA sample. And there it was. I was already starting to look at this as a crime scene. I looked down at the ground and saw my boot prints in the dirt. Leading up to the camper, I also saw other tracks. There was another set of adult boot prints, a set of adult sneakers, and 2 different sets of smaller sneakers. Those were spooky but comforting. At least I knew these people were here somewhere. They hadn't just vanished from inside the camper. No, it was the other footprints that gave me chills. They were adult sized and it looked like there was more than one of them, but the creepy thing about them was they were bare feet. I couldn't imagine anyone who lived in the area being stupid enough to walk around the desert in their bare feet. Aside from the different types of scorpions, there were also snakes, spiders, and lizards, just to name a few. It was becoming more likely that I would find this family dead from stupidity. I followed the barefoot tracks and they seemed to lead around the corner of the camper. In fact, they did several laps around the camper with frequent stops where the feet were pointed toward the camper as if looking inside. That's when it hit me like a ton of bricks. This family had been stalked. I stepped in a wider circle so I wouldn't disturb the footprints. It became more apparent by the minute that this was a crime scene. I pulled out my radio to call in my position and request backup or police, but my radio was strangely silent. It didn't even click when I released the talk button. The light was lit, so I knew the battery was charged. It just wasn't transmitting. The smart thing to do just then would have been to get in my truck and drive to the station to report what was happening. I took one step toward the truck. That's when I heard the scream. It was a woman's scream, high and piercing. It was a scream of pain and anguish, as if her whole world had come crashing down. My fight or flight kicked in and there wasn't an ounce of flight in it. In a heartbeat, my gun was in my hand. I turned toward the town and began following the footprints. Once they were done circling the camper, they headed straight into town. Dusk had faded and taken the light with it. I pulled my flashlight off my belt and used it to guide me on my trail. There were a half-dozen buildings all in some level of decay. I was worried about stepping into one and it collapsing on top of me. That aside from the chance of meeting a scorpion or some other creature that didn't appreciate being disturbed in their territory, the wind had died down and the air was still. It was so quiet, I could hear my own footsteps. There was something else too. I felt a vibration in the air. At the time I thought it was just my heightened senses at the prospect of meeting up with a dangerous person who may have harmed that family. Even though everything within me was demanding I run towards the scream I'd heard, my steps were slow and measured. I needed more input. I needed to know how many people I was dealing with. I needed to identify threats and if I would be able to deal with this without becoming a victim myself. As I approached the first building, I had a strong feeling of being watched. Stepping on the porch made the boards creak threateningly. I didn't want this to end with a broken ankle or worse. I tested the boards before putting full weight on them and slowly approached the broken windows. I shined my light inside. I panned around slowly, finding a bunch of old boxes and general junk with the odd wooden chair and table. I was about to move on when back in the far corner I saw a pair of eyes lit by my flashlight. I froze, my light locked on it. The eyes seemed to be locked on the light as well. I couldn't tell what it was, but it scared the hell out of me. I suddenly thought of the movie I'd recently seen, Jurassic Park, when the actor was explaining how raptors attack, how one will draw your attention while 2 more sneak up on you and attack from the side. I suddenly felt very vulnerable, as if someone was sneaking up behind me. I whipped around, pointing with my gun and flashlight, my eyes darting all around, but I couldn't see anything. I shined my light back inside, but the eyes were gone. This didn't comfort me. In fact, it did the opposite. I was in a panic. I felt like I was surrounded, and they were just toying with me. I didn't even know who they were. I took a few deep breaths to get myself under control. I knew panic led to bad decisions, and I couldn't afford any bad decisions out here on my own. I shined my light back toward the camper and saw a shadow dart out of the light. I knew it was all or nothing. There was no backing out. I was being hunted, just like that family had been. I didn't know what was hunting me, but it didn't matter. Whoever or whatever, it was dangerous. Focus, I told myself. Stay on your toes, remember your training. Even though my training also said don't get yourself in a bad situation, it was already too late for that. Something was near the camper. I still had no idea if this family was dead or alive. The only things I had to go on were mysterious footprints and a scream. It was the stuff of every horror movie ever made. I just hoped I didn't end up as one of the victims that died a horrible gory death to save some stupid teenagers who risked their own lives by blundering into something they should have left alone. I sighed, turned my light back to the ground, and followed the footprints. I noticed for the first time there were other marks among the footprints. They had been and walked over and obscured, but it looked like two long lines like someone was being dragged. I brought my flashlight back up just in time to see a set of eyes disappear behind a building on the other side of the street. I stepped up to the next building and shined my light inside to find much the same as the first, minus the eyes. I didn't linger long before turning my light back out to the streets and the other buildings. I felt like it somehow kept them at bay, as if they would work their way closer to me if I didn't shine my light their way. I didn't know how long this would last. I continued to the next building with a larger building looming larger at the end of the street. It looked like it was an old church. There was the rough shape of a steeple that had partially collapsed. I turned and flashed my light back to the street to keep the hunters back. When I stepped up to the window of the next building and shined my light inside, I found bones. Piles of bones. Most looked like they were from smaller animals, but there were larger ones interspersed with them. I was sure I spotted a couple of human femurs. I tried my radio again, but it still wasn't working. The vibration in the air was getting stronger. It was oppressive, like the pressure you feel when you're underwater. The stillness in the air magnified any sound. I could hear the footsteps of someone behind me, but when I turned, I couldn't see anyone. I left the bone storage building and headed for the last building at the end of the street, the church. I walked up to the doors and they were very plain. Two wooden doors, no Gothic architecture, no cross, just a couple of wooden doors that looked like they were about to fall off their hinges. I hesitated, turned, and looked back down the street. I knew they were there, but couldn't see them. This was where they'd been hurting me all along. I held my gun and flashlight at the ready, knowing I was in for a fight as soon as the doors opened. I took a deep, cleansing breath, then shoved the doors open. I shined my light all around, my eyes darting to all the dark corners. Except they weren't dark. There were candles lit all around. It was quite beautiful. It was also quite empty. There was no one there. Even empty and well lit, it gave off a creepy vibe. Why do empty churches always do that? You would think it would be the opposite. My senses went on high alert. I didn't trust it. It must be a trap. As I continued to scan back and forth, looking for any hiding spots among the pews, I noticed there was one person there, in the first pew, bent over so I could barely see them. I slowly made my way forward, head on a swivel as I approached the lone figure. When I was nearly there, it looked like they were barely breathing. I came around in front of the creature and aimed my gun. She looked up at me. She was naked and her hands and mouth were bound. As soon as she saw me, she started screaming into the gag in her mouth. She was screaming so hard her face turned red. I reached down and slid the gag off her mouth. "It's a trap," she screamed. I looked up and saw my worst nightmare. There were creatures, dozens of them. Each one looked vaguely human, but they were deformed. There was one that had one healthy arm and a second that was shriveled up. One had only a single leg but still managed to hop toward me. Another had no legs but used its arms to crawl on the floor. None of them had a full set of teeth, but they all had a look of hunger and rage in their eyes. They came from everywhere. Some even crawled their way down from hiding places in the ceiling like some horrific Spider-Man. They swarmed toward the front of the church. I looked around for anywhere to go, anywhere to hide, when I locked eyes on a door that looked like it was a closet. "Come on," I said, grabbing her arm and dragging her over to the door. "No, I can't. Please don't make me," she said, tugging against me. "We go in here or we die," I said, cutting the ropes around her wrists and putting my jacket over her shoulders. She reluctantly came along with me as the horde of creatures was nearly on us. "Click," I said, opening the door and shoving her through. I slammed it shut behind me, taking out my knife and jamming it into the wooden doorframe to keep it shut. I turned and nearly ran her over. She hadn't moved. She was standing there staring into the dark. I shined my flashlight in front of us and saw a rickety staircase descending into the darkness. "Please don't make me go down there," she whimpered. "We don't have a choice," I said. "They'll be through this door soon." The pounding had gotten louder. She turned toward the door, then pulled my jacket closer around her and took a deep breath. I stepped around her and led the way, shining my light all around, trying to make sure we wouldn't run into any surprises. The boards creaked menacingly with every step I took. I couldn't see what was underneath but had no desire to find out the fast way. I looked back and she was still staring down. I held my hand out and she slowly took one step, then another. Her bare feet were filthy. I wondered if she was getting splinters as she took each step slowly and gingerly, as if walking on hot coals. After she had taken a few steps, I turned back to guide our way. The stairway was long and attached to an uneven stone wall. At some points, it jutted out far enough I had to squeeze around to get to the next step. It was getting colder as we descended. I started missing my jacket but knew she needed it more. The spiderwebs weren't helping my anxiety either. I wondered if they were made by the deadly breed. I glanced back and saw she was still working her way down the stairs. When I looked forward again, there was a creature coming up the stairs toward me. I didn't think, just reacted. I barely had the gun pointed until I fired. The creature fell back with shock frozen on its face and tumbled down the stairs. I instantly regretted my action as my ears were already ringing from the gunshot in such an enclosed place. I turned around to check on her, but she was curled up in the fetal position sitting on a step, ears covered, rocking back and forth. "It's okay," I tried to say, but my voice sounded strange. "I guess temporary deafness will do that." At least I hoped it was temporary. She didn't look at me. I was unsure if she had heard me, so I touched her shoulder and she immediately recoiled and climbed several stairs backing away. I bent down to her. "Look, I know you're scared. I would be too, but if we're going to get out of this, we have to do it together. If I'm going to have to check on you every few steps, we'll be helpless if another one of those things attacks. I don't want to go down there," she stammered. I looked ahead and then back at her. "We have no choice." I turned and started down the stairs again. After around a dozen steps, I turned to see she had stood and was slowly making her way down again. I kept going until I made it to the bottom and kicked the corpse of the creature out of our way. I looked around but there wasn't much to see. It was a passageway made of the same rough-cut rock walls and a dirt floor. I turned to see her make it to the last step. Her eyes were wide with fear. I could only imagine what she had already been through. She looked away as she stepped past the corpse. I decided to make a little conversation as we walked down the endless passageway to get her to focus on something other than our situation. "You're from the camper, aren't you?" I said. She nodded absently as she stared at the floor. "Were you going on vacation?" Another nod. I saw the kids' toothbrushes on the bathroom sink. "How many kids do you have?" Her eyes glazed over. "2 boys. And your husband is with you." She nodded. "Where were you headed?" "Vegas." "What made you stop here?" The kids wanted to see the abandoned town. Tears streamed down her dirty cheeks, making lines on her face. "Would you like me to stop talking?" She nodded. We continued forward in silence. The chill of the place made me shiver, but not just because of the temperature. The thought of being attacked at any moment was more than keeping me on my toes. It was wearing on my nerves. After some distance, we came to an opening that stretched out into a full room. She stopped and stared. I was puzzled at first until I noticed the smell. It was the stench of death. I shined my light around the room. The first corner I came to held a pile of bones. There was no denying these ones were human. They were large in the right shape. There were even a couple of full torsos still together that hadn't deteriorated yet. In the next corner, there were 3 bodies hanging from the dirt ceiling. It looked like a man and 2 boys. They had been strung up by their arms and were covered in blood. There were innumerable cuts and puncture wounds, but the most horrid sight were the many bites that were taken out of them. She collapsed and began to sob. I knew right away this was her family. "I'm so sorry," I said. She looked at me with a mix of hopelessness and rage. "I tried to tell you not to come down here," she said with quiet forcefulness. "I'm sure we can find some way to." She shook her head violently. "You don't understand," she said, looking me straight in the eyes for the first time. "This is the trap." She stood up straight for the first time since I'd seen her in the church, took off my jacket, and tossed it behind her. She was beautiful, even though she was covered in filth. "My children need food," she said, stretching out her arm. In an instant, 2 deformed creatures appeared and stood beside her. She stroked the thinning hair on their heads as they cooed at her. "So, there was no woman in the camper," I said, trying to stall for time until I could come up with a plan. "Oh, no, there was a woman. She was taken to the birthing house. She will give my children their own children, against her will, of course." She looked at me with disdain. "She is a tool we will use to survive, just like my ancestors were treated as tools to be used in the mines." I glanced around the room and saw several more creatures emerge from the shadows and advance slowly toward me. I knew I was trapped. My mind scrambled for some plan, any plan to escape the horrors that waited for me. I glanced at the 3 bloody, mangled bodies dangling from the ceiling and knew that would be my fate. I made my decision and didn't hesitate to implement it. In a flash, I drew my pistol and shot her in the forehead. The sound was still echoing when I started to run back to the passageway I had come from. I hoped that the shock of seeing their mother die would give me a head start before the horde of creatures hunted me down and tore me to shreds. Time seemed to move in slow motion. I felt like I was running underwater. Every move, every step seemed incredibly slow. I knew they would catch me. There was no doubt in my mind. It was only a matter of time. The only thing that kept me from giving up was the sheer will to live. I swung the flashlight as I ran, making shadows jump and fly around. I arrived at the bottom of the stairs much sooner than I thought possible and threw myself up them 2 at a time, praying that I didn't trip. The horde was hot on my heels. I could hear them getting closer. The grunts and snarls spurred me on even faster. I felt something brush against my heel and knew I had to act. I didn't bother to look back. I fired 2 shots into the closest one. I heard the inhuman scream and the sound of falling bodies. I risked a glance back to see them all tumbling down the stairs. I breathed a sigh of relief as I reached the door and struggled to pry my knife out of the wood. After a few agonizingly long seconds, it came free and I dove through the door. Much to my surprise and relief, the church was empty. They must have all gone another way to trap me below. I looked over at the dozens of glowing candles and ran straight toward them, knocking over as many as I could. I ran to the far wall and did the same on my way out the door. Once I was through, I turned back and jammed my knife into the doors so they wouldn't open. I didn't waste time celebrating my close escape. I ran down the middle of the street so I would have a good view of anyone or anything chasing me. It didn't take long until I heard footsteps behind. They sounded more like a pack of dogs chasing me. I glanced back, and sure enough, there were a half-dozen deformed creatures in hot pursuit against the backdrop of the church engulfed in flame. I took some solace in the fact that at least some of the unnatural bastards must have burned up in the blaze. I had a stitch in my side and my leg muscles burned, but I didn't dare slow down. Even at the speed I was running, they were catching up. I wasn't sure if I would make it to the truck before they got me. It was going to be close. I reached the truck and breathed a sigh of relief that I hadn't locked it. By the time I got the keys in the ignition and started it, they were on me. I locked the doors and slammed it into reverse as the first body flew into my windshield, shattering it. I got some momentum going as another landed on my hood and another grabbed my door handle. I swung the truck around and slammed on the brake, sending them flying. I threw it in drive and stomped on the gas, spraying gravel. I hadn't gone more than a few yards when another freak landed in the truck bed and started pounding on the cab roof. I could see the dents getting deeper. It would be through soon. Suddenly the pounding stopped. I kept my eye on the road but turned to see what was happening. It smashed through my rear window, grabbing me by the neck. I swerved to try to break its grip, to no avail. I could feel myself starting to black out. I knew that would be a death sentence. I pointed my gun out the window, but the creature grabbed it before I could aim at its head. My mind raced faster than the truck that was hurtling down the dirt road at breakneck speeds. I was seeing stars. I knew it was a matter of minutes until the end, if not seconds. I squeezed the trigger. The gun went off right beside its head, missing it by a few inches. I was done. It howled in pain and fear at the sound and the heat of the round going off. Amazingly, it let go of the gun. I aimed at its head and squeezed the trigger again. Blood rained on me as its head snapped back and it fell into the bed of the truck with a heavy thump. I set the gun on the seat beside me as I breathed huge gulps of air, wiping the blood out of my eyes. My vision returned just in time for the turn onto the main road. The tires screeched as they bit into the asphalt on the way to the ranger station. I got there shortly after sunrise, pulled into a parking space, and sat back in the seat. Exhaustion and adrenaline crash sapped my energy. I fell asleep. I woke to the sound of someone knocking on my window. I whipped around, grabbed the gun off the seat, and swung it back around at the window. "Whoa there, son," the older ranger said, raising his hands. "What's got your panties in a bunch?" I took a deep breath, lowered the gun in the window, then told him the whole story. The longer I went, the more serious he became. Until the story was done, his face was made of granite. He stuck his hand in the window. "Keys," he said. I pulled the keys out of the ignition and handed them to him. "Go inside and get yourself cleaned up," he said. "I'll take care of this." I stepped out of the truck on shaky legs and walked into the ranger station, threw away my bloody uniform, and took a long shower. By the time I had finished and changed into a fresh uniform, the other ranger was back. He stepped inside the station and scanned the room until he found me. "All taken care of," he said with a crooked smile. "What do you mean?" I said. "Did you call the police?" He looked around at the handful of rangers that were milling around the room trying to make it look like they weren't listening to our conversation. "Yeah, we're not gonna get the police involved in this," he said. "What? Why not?" He looked at me with an odd determination in his eyes. "So you really killed her, did you?" He said. "Of course, it was her or me. Most of the folks around here give that place a wide berth," he said. "There's signs all over saying no entering in danger. You'd think it was almost natural selection for those who ignore all the warnings. But those travelers, and then there are others who visit the place on the down low, all quiet like," he said as if I hadn't said anything. "Those folks might say you robbed them of their fun. You might even call them conjugal visits. There might even be some of those folks in this very room." I stared at him in disbelief, then looked around the room and saw every set of eyes focused on me. There wasn't a smile or even a hint of one that suggested this was a joke. He clapped his hand on my shoulder. "Why don't you head home and rest today?" he said. "You've had a long night. We'll take care of things." He ushered me toward the door, pausing before opening it. "Just remember that nothing happened," he said, "because if the police get an anonymous phone call, we might have to drive out and grab a couple of children to come visit your house in the middle of the night. You get me?" I nodded my head in a daze as he opened the door. That's the story I tell when people don't take the hint and stay away from the town. It's been years, and every once in a while, I hear of travelers that disappeared in the area. I shake my head and wonder. I shouldn't be writing this down, but I have no one left to tell and not much time to tell it. What feels like a lifetime ago, I unexpectedly inherited $12 million and a horrible curse. This was back when I was 20. I was home this summer after junior year to work at my uncle's restaurant. Back then it was possible to work your way through college. My uncle's idea of special treatment for family was calling me in anytime they were short-staffed or someone didn't bother to show up for a shift. And it wasn't like I could lie and say I was busy. He'd just call his brother, my dad. It was good money though, and I needed it. I ride my bike to and from work at odd hours. It was a small town, so everyone waved when we passed each other. I'd see her watching me from her wraparound porch at the end of the street, both to and from the restaurant no matter what time of day or night. I'd always raise my hand and give her a little smile, but never got a response, just a blank stare. Mrs. Miller was old by then. I'm not sure what she was like before. Although I grew up on that street and was out most nights playing basketball with the other neighborhood kids, I don't remember ever seeing her on that porch. I mentioned this once to my parents to see if they noticed her out there too. They never had. Our next door neighbor told my family she might have had dementia. It's sad, I don't think she had anyone to help her. Then local dogs started sniffing around her house on walks. The mailman found her body. Once the letters piled up in her box to the point of falling out, and her unpaid bills couldn't be crammed in any tighter, he knocked on her door. It was the smell that made him call the police. Steve from the homeowners association went in after them on the welfare check. He may have been the closest person to her just by requesting dues and asking that she take care of her yard. She didn't have any family. Steve was also the only one to see the body, at least what was left of it. They had to do a DNA confirmation to make sure it was her. The remains went straight to cremation. On the dusty, cluttered dining room table, they found a stack of documents bound in old leather. It was worn but clean and looked like it had recently been polished. It may have been the last thing she touched. I only know all this because it was given to me once everything had settled. Her will had only one name, mine, and included assets totaling an unbelievable $12 million. I remember sitting in her lawyer's office shocked, silent, and trying not to grin like a serial killer after signing his papers as my mind whirred with ideas of what I could do with all that money. There was only one condition in her will to respect, and that was that I read some letters she's left me, like any young kid. I wanted everything life had to offer, and someone just handed me a golden ticket. I raced home to tell my parents. My mom cried and called it a gift from God. My dad demanded that I give it all back. There must be a mistake and it wasn't mine. But my family was struggling, so eventually the gift won. I grew up knowing that my parents would never retire unless I could help them out, and they were in danger of losing the house. I paid off their mortgage that same week. But there was a strange feeling passing Mrs. Miller's home each day in my brand new dream car. I know it's distasteful to say an old woman's death made the best day of your life, so I felt guilty each time I passed that familiar overgrown yard and now empty rocking chair. I got a sense of darkness from the place. It was like the clouds hung heavier over it. Even the trees bent as if weighed down. It was legally my home now, but I wanted nothing to do with it. Even without the crushing feeling I got any time I went too close, an old lady's decaying body had lain on that rotting wood floor for weeks. The thought pulled at my mind the more I tried avoiding it. One night, I remembered the letter she'd left for me with the will. I'd completely forgotten in my excitement. I grabbed my backpack where the will and letter had ended up when I dashed out of that lawyer's office. The envelope was wax sealed. Inside, the paper was thick but crisp. The handwriting was shaky cursive that I struggled to make out. It read, "I'll start by offering my sincerest apologies. I know little more of you than you knew of me, but I beg you to honor an old woman's dying wish. Find the wooden jewelry box with the red velvet lining. You must understand what I have truly given you." That note consumed my every thought until finally, I couldn't delay any longer. I resolved to just grab the box, renovate and sell the house, then put it out of my mind. Every impulse screamed at me to turn back with each step up those crumbling stairs, but I forced myself forward. The moment my hand closed around the rusted doorknob, a shudder passed through me from how cold it felt. I shrugged it off, embarrassed at how dramatic I was being. After everything Mrs. Miller had left to me, the least I could do was fix her house up and pass it on to some nice family. There was no light inside. Her power had been shut off for so long, and even in the early afternoon, no sunlight passed through the filthy windows and curtains. I steeled myself and raised my flashlight. Just a clutter of old furniture, musty books, dusty trinkets, and sticky carpet that pulled at my shoes as I cautiously walked in. I shuddered and tried not to think of what that might be. In the entire downstairs, there was no sign of the box she had left for me. I'd hoped it would be easier and that I wouldn't have to go upstairs. The body had been in the master bedroom where she died, hopefully peaceful and in her sleep. I forced down my revulsion and ignored the prickling of my skin and marched resolutely up the carpeted steps of her too narrow staircase past wall portraits that I could almost brush with my shoulders. It was like the walls got closer the further up I went. Of course, I may have been imagining things. My foot hit the top landing with a wet squelch and an agonized scream. I jumped back and almost fell down the entire staircase. The only thing that kept me from bolting forever was the fear that fossilized me in place where I landed. The flashlight clutched like a lifeline and my hand cut through the darkness just enough for me to make out the eyes of a particularly large rat trying to scramble away with its now crushed hind legs. Its oil black eyes shine in the darkness, swirling with terror. I wonder sometimes what would have happened if I'd turned back then, if I'd had the house demolished and moved to the other side of the world. But of course, instead I told myself it was just an animal, and if I checked the upstairs now, I'd never have to come back. So I continued, opening each door and being careful to watch my steps. The rest of the rooms were more of the same, and none contained the box I was sent to find. I stalled and wondered if there was an attic I could check instead of opening the last door, but the only thing I could think of worse than going into Mrs. Miller's bedroom was standing in that claustrophobic hallway with a crippled rat dying somewhere in the shadows any longer than I had to. I was kicking myself for not bringing someone with me as I pushed the heavy door open. The smell is hard to forget. Even the burn of bleach couldn't fully cover the stench of human decay. The cleaners were professionals, but I doubt most deaths were this hard to erase. Mr. Stevens had said she had been partially liquid. The heat of summer and stagnant air had only intensified the nauseating smell on the humid air drowning my lungs. My only saving grace was that an ornate wooden jewelry box's polished cherry wood gleamed on the dresser as my flashlight beamed on it. I grabbed it and fled without a backwards glance. Only when I was home did I think to check for a red velvet lining. I unlatched the lid with shaking fingers and found the red lining, as well as another letter. This one looked old. It had been folded and refolded until the creases softened to fibers, but the writing was sharper and clearer than the last. "I'm afraid I've given you a great fortune and a terrible fate. If there's a way to be rid of it, heaven knows I've tried. May your luck be better than mine. I crumpled the stupid note in my hand. Furious, the old woman had forced me through her decrepit death trap of a house just for a scrap of superstition. I tried to rip it up, but just got paper cuts, so I flung it in the fireplace instead and lit a nice blaze. When I checked later though, the paper wasn't even singed. I dunked it in the sink and tried to bleed the ink away, but droplets beat it up and rolled off the page. In my dad's home office, the shredder jammed as soon as the edge of the letter touched the blades. With each attempt, I grew more and more frantic in my suspicion that the curse was true rose. The last thing I tried was to bury the box with the note locked inside it in the yard of Mrs. Miller's, now my house. Relief was immediate, and I didn't see the box until a few days later when I tripped over it on my front doorstep. I kept the box in the end, shoved it as far as I could to the back of my closet, under piles of clothes and blankets. At least that way I didn't have to see it. Life was good for a while after. I gave generously to charities, deciding that at least some good should come from this, and hopefully earn myself some good karma. I set up funds for my parents' retirement. They'd never have to work another day if they didn't want to. I helped my uncle's restaurant get out of debt. I spent the last month of my summer traveling the world, and I bought the most beautiful engagement ring money could buy. Back to college for my senior year, I thrived in the knowledge of my financial security. The only classes I took were the ones I was genuinely interested in. My roommate struggled with money though, just as I had before. I heard his worry-filled phone calls home and watched him wilt under the pressure of his full course load and 2 jobs. So I secretly set up a scholarship fund just for him that conveniently paid for all his costs. I thought maybe this was the answer. Giving the money away could keep me safe from whatever Mrs. Miller had thought was tied to it. That was until I came back from class early one day to see my roommate hanging from the ceiling. Even worse, he'd still been alive. Staring into his bulging eyes, I witnessed the last second of life before he went limp. It had been too late to save him from his own hands. My mental breakdown followed swiftly after. I dropped out and moved home, still haunted by his discolored, distorted face in my dreams. I fell into a type of religious fervor after that. My devout mother was surprised, but ultimately pleased that her prodigal son returned to church with her. I prayed with desperation. I tithed an entire $1 million. I attended every service and event at the church I hadn't set foot in since my childhood. Then I got the news of the church fire, a freak accident with a votive candle. The pastor's family and the entire practicing choir had been inside. No survivors, nothing left but ashes to bury. The box hidden deep in my closet burned in the back of my mind. Whatever doubts I had before were gone now. The first thing I did after the mass funeral was break up with my girlfriend. We'd been high school sweethearts and were talking about getting married. As soon as she got her degree 1 year after me, she was, and still is, the love of my life. That's why I had to do anything I could to save her from this thing that follows me and takes everything I care about. I could never answer when she asked why. She didn't believe my half-hearted excuses. She knew me too well. I saved voicemails that are just the sound of her crying into my answering machine. Maybe I'm just ripping my own heart out over and over again, but I have replayed them countless times. It's sweet melancholy to know that at one point I was loved. I've ended every casual fling over the years. The second things could have become more. I still have that engagement ring I bought for her too. Whether or not it stopped the nightmare that had become my life, I wanted that house gone. I hired landscapers to redo the yard, exterminators for the rats, and the best renovation company I could find to completely overhaul the Miller house. Anytime they asked me for my opinion on tile or paint color, I told them to do what they thought best. I refused to go near it. My only demand was that they completely gut the master bedroom, the drywall, the ceiling. I even made them replace the beams of the walls, which took some incredible feats of engineering. I begged them every time they wanted to quit. Accidents were frequent and severe. In the end, they stayed. They charged me an arm and a leg, which was also what a team member happened to have lost, but left me with a beautiful new-looking building. Plenty of families came to the open house. My realtor gave countless tours, but offer after offer got retracted. I lowered the asking price each time until the entire home was worth less than the repairs I'd put in. No takers. I couldn't have paid someone to live there. When a squatter was found dead, crushed by a fallen sheet chandelier, the house started to get a reputation around town, and so did I, myself. By then I was a recluse, speaking to no one and fighting with my family as I tried to pull away. I sped out of our driveway with just one suitcase, and that damn box as my mother screamed for me to wait. I moved to an apartment 2 towns away, one that was basically failing and had as few residents as possible. I can't even count the years I wallowed there. It didn't matter though. Eventually my family and friends stopped reaching out, and I told myself it was for the best. You can't shut people out forever though. Solitary confinement is torture. People go crazy from it. Family is much harder to break away from than anyone else. Maybe if I was stronger, I could have. The guilt still eats at me from the inside. I'd check up on them, drive by their home as night fell just to see if the lights were on, or to possibly glimpse my parents through a window. I'd get the local paper and scan for obituaries, hoping not to find them. When my uncle died, I wasn't even surprised. The paper said he'd slipped on the floor of his restaurant and cracked his head. I wish I'd never given him that money. He needed to keep it. I wish I'd left sooner. My mom tried to reach out to invite me to the funeral. She must not have known if I'd even get the message, but I never changed my number out of some lingering hope that one day I'd break the curse and come back, that maybe I could unbreak my family's hearts. The last time she called, it was to tell me she and my dad both had lung cancer. Turns out the house I paid off had asbestos we'd never known about. It was terminal by the time they found out. I went home to spend whatever time they had left as a family. My dad died within a month of me returning. My mom just a week after. I confessed everything to my mom, comatose in her hospice bed. I'll never know whether she heard me. She never woke up. The last stage of grief isn't acceptance, it's just numbness. After burying my parents, I moved into the Miller house. I could feel that it wanted me, and it had been waiting. I had no one left and nowhere to go. I tried to fight the curse with priests, witches, exorcists, and paranormal investigators. I even tried a fortune teller who took one glimpse at me and tossed me out on the street. Nothing lifted the darkness I could feel closing in on me every day. Over these long years I've lain in bed most nights and wondered why she chose me. Was mine the only name she remembered in the end with her addled brain? Then I found her diary. Last week on a sleepless night, I felt compelled to open the jewelry box and read the letter again. This time as I lifted the lid, I noticed how strangely shallow the box was inside. The velvet bottom came up easily and I saw the worn notebook that lay there. In it, Mrs. Miller detailed her life with the family curse. Through countless generations, tragedy followed the Miller heirs. Each time, the wealth passed on has grown, and each time, the curse has grown stronger. Mrs. Miller herself lost all her children before she passed. But even as her mind and body started to disintegrate, the curse kept her alive. The only way to escape is to pass it on, and so I'm choosing my heir at random. The thought of picking someone out to receive grief even worse than I've had, it's too cruel to think of. I've taken every name in the US white pages, sorted them alphabetically, and generated a random number. It can't be my fault that way. It's a 1 in 330 million chance. It's someone's unlucky lottery win. It will be my time soon. I feel it. The weight grows heavier every moment, and I wake in the night gasping for air. The doctors say it's sleep apnea, but I know the truth. I refuse treatment. Their machines can't stop what is coming for me. It feels crazy to say, but out of everything, the waiting is the worst part. I've finished a will, I've written the name, and if you're listening to this, I sincerely hope it isn't yours. Hi, my name is Daniel. You could say I've aged 20 years in the past few days. There are some experiences on this earth that are almost too revolting to be put into words. But I just need to tell someone. So please forgive me for putting images in your head that most would fear to even dream of. I've worked in the service industry for my entire life, mostly kitchens, but I've done a bit of work as a barback or a porter when need be. It's a crazy industry, high turnover, terrible customers, irregular schedules, late hours, you know the deal. For all of that, however, there are still great coworkers, good tips, and a high energy environment that really makes you feel alive. At 25, however, I was starting to feel like my years in the industry were coming to an end. I was too tired all the time from having my sleep schedule messed up, and after COVID, the industry just wasn't as lucrative as it had been before. I was browsing online one morning, searching for jobs, when I stumbled upon an ad that looked promising. I should also mention that, even though I worked in the service industry, I've always had pretty crippling anxiety when it comes to social interaction. Something about small talk, simple everyday conversations, they just make me feel like I need to run away and hide. It's probably why I always worked in kitchens. You just don't need to talk that much or interact with anyone, you can just focus on your work. So when I saw this listing for an office job, I was thrilled. A cubicle, nobody around, perfect peace and quiet. The listing read, office job, administration role, $25 an hour, experience not a necessity, an office job, sure why not? I said to myself as I sent my information off to the email attached to the posting. I had sent off 2 applications so far, so I decided a break was in order. I opened a bag of chips and sat down on my couch to watch some Netflix. A few hours had passed when my phone rang, and my head snapped around to the sound. As I watched my phone ring on the cushion next to me, 4 p.m., who calls someone this early? I said to myself as I raised a quizzical eyebrow to the phone. Hello, I said as I accepted the call and put it on speakerphone. Hi, is this Daniel? Came a pleasant sounding female voice from the phone. Yes, who is this? I answered. Hi Daniel, this is Claire. I work for the HR department of Walmart Inc. and I'm calling about your application that you sent in earlier today, she said cheerily. Oh right. What can I do for you? I asked. I'm just wondering if you had some time for a quick phone interview. Of course, ask away, I said, voice full of hope. I remember the interview being pretty standard. Name, address, phone number, social security number, that sort of thing. I had only just woken up and was kind of high, so my memory may not be perfect, but there was one question that made me uneasy. Would you say you're a focused person? Claire asked, at which I recoiled slightly. Focused on what? I asked. As in, are you able to focus on tasks for extended periods of time? Oh yes, absolutely. Well Daniel, that's all I've got. Do you have any questions for me? Sure, I chuckled. When do I start? How does Monday sound? Claire said, laughing slightly. I'll email you all the details. Welcome aboard. The call ended and I threw my phone back down on the couch inside. I did think it was a bit strange that they had hired me so quickly, but hey, $25 an hour is great. Who cares? I knew that kitchens hired very quickly as well, so I figured that maybe offices were the same. The weekend came and went. I had some drinks on Friday with my friends and bragged about the big boy job that I was going to start Monday. They all congratulated me and we had a few rounds of shots. I went out on Sunday to pick up some business casual clothing, which I had very little of. I grabbed a new, fancy looking pair of leather shoes and admired myself in the mirror. My beard was a bit ratty, so I trimmed it up and thought I looked damn good. Wow, I clean up good, I said as I gave finger guns to my reflection in the bathroom mirror. Monday came and I rose bright and early for the first time in years. I showered quickly, dressed, tucked my shirt in, and threw a tie around my collar. I poured a coffee into my thermos, grabbed the lunch I had made the night before, and jumped into my car, excited for new beginnings. Little did I know how foolish I would prove to be. I arrived at the address of the office, which was a drab brownish building in the commercial, industrial parks of the city's East End. Not nearly as appealing as the outside of a bar or a restaurant, but I suppose that offices don't need to look good. Well, first day of the rest of my life, let's do it, I said to myself as I adjusted my tie and walked in the front door. There was a desk in the front foyer with a middle-aged woman sitting behind it. She looked up as I entered and pushed her glasses up her nose. Oh, you must be the new one, she said cheerily. I'm Daniel, nice to meet you, I replied with my best customer service smile. I'm looking for Claire, is she around? I'll call her for you, have a seat dear, the woman said, gesturing to a couch against the wall. She picked up the phone and had a brief conversation that I couldn't hear, and a minute or two later waved me back up to the desk. She'll meet you on the 4th floor, just head up the elevator there, the woman said, pointing to a set of steel gray doors behind her. I did as I was bid and ascended to the 4th floor where a young, attractive blonde woman was waiting for me. I put on a big smile as I approached and offered my hand. Daniel, she asked, shaking my hand. That's me, Claire. Yes, nice to meet you. Come along, I'll give you a short tour and show you to your desk. I followed close on Claire's heels as she showed me around the various parts of the office. It was all drab and gray, with humming fluorescent lights and gray carpeting everywhere. I was brought to my new cubicle and desk after about half an hour and spent the rest of the day learning what my job was going to be. It was basically just boring data entry, but I was okay with that. I met a few of my new coworkers and went home for the day. I returned to work the next day, somewhat lamenting that this job wasn't nearly as exciting as working in a kitchen, but the pay was much better and it was time for me to grow up. I was finally allowed to work on my own today and told to call my supervisor if I needed any help. I decided to organize my desk a bit before I set to work, lining up pencils and aligning my stapler just right. When I was checking through the top drawer of my desk, I happened across an old and crumpled piece of paper which I unfolded and smoothed out on my desk. I was confused at first as I read the list over, but my confusion quickly turned to dread as I started to read further. Here's what it said. Hello, if you're reading this, I offer you my condolences and wish you the best of luck. I'm afraid you've been trapped in a terrible situation that is only survivable if you follow the list of rules that I will detail below. Make sure you never deviate from this list if you want to stay alive. Rule 1. Never show up to work after 9 a.m. If you're going to be late, just call in sick. It's safer that way. Rule 2. Every day at exactly 10:15, a local radio station will be heard playing from Steven's cubicle. Try not to listen. If you ever encounter Steven in the office and he asks if you've heard what Crash and Mars were talking about this morning, make sure you always answer no and get away from him as fast as possible. Rule 3. If you ever get called into Dave's office, never refuse to go and make sure you stay in the office until he's done speaking. Never ignore the summons and never leave the office before he is done. Agree to whatever he asks of you. Rule 4. Never get drunk with Greg in the company truck at lunchtime, no matter what he says to convince you. If you do go, however, pray to whatever God you believe in, and remember Rule 3. Rule 5. If you must ever stop at Sharon's desk, do whatever you can to avoid making eye contact with the pictures of her kids. Rule 6. Never go into the men's bathroom between 3:15 and 3:30. Rule 7. Always have cash on you. If Carol ever asks you to contribute to buying a birthday cake or donuts, give her $5 and tell her that you're very busy with the Coventry account. She should leave you alone. Rule 8. Never let Dave see that you have Microsoft Excel open. Rule 9. If Jack ever asks you how it's going, always reply "oh, it's going" and leave the area while he's laughing. Do not reply with anything else to this question. Rule 10. Have a list of excuses handy. If Kayla ever invites you to any event, work or otherwise, always decline, no matter what. If you follow these rules, you may just survive. Good luck. My hands were trembling as I set the paper back down on my desk. What have I gotten myself into? I thought as I held my head in between my hands. This must just be some kind of sick joke they play on the new guy. This must be a joke. It has to be, I thought. I figured there was only one way to know for sure if the rules were true or not. I had to break one. I fixed my resolve and read the list over a second time. Rule 8 seemed like the consequences might not be too bad. So I opened Microsoft Excel and rang Dave's extension. I was holding my breath as the phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Dan the man, what can I do for ya? Dave's voice echoed over the phone. Dan the man, this may be worse than I thought. I gulped in fear. Hey boss, I just had a quick question about some of the employee forms that I'm signing, wondering if I could get a hand. No need to call me boss. Old Dave will be right over, Dave said and hung up the receiver. I wiped the sweat from my brow with my tie as I heard Dave's footsteps plodding down the hallway towards me. It was now or never. I had to be brave. Alright, let's have a look-see, Dave said as he reached my cubicle. I could see his eyes focus for a brief moment on the Excel spreadsheet that was open over my shoulder, but quickly returned to the direct deposit form I was waiting about. Oh, you will want to see Jeremy in accounting about all that money nonsense. He should be free today after 3:30 when he gets back from his usual break, Dave said, waving his hand dismissively. Alright, can do, I said, forcing a smile. How's your second day treating you, bud? Dave said, slapping my shoulder. Good, finally getting settled. I smiled. Good to hear, Dave started. Did I ever mention that I took a class about Excel? He said, pointing over my shoulder. No, I don't think you mentioned it, I said, feigning ignorance. Here, scoot over, I'll show you a few tricks of the trade, Dave said, waving me aside as he hunched over my computer. What followed was 45 minutes of Dave teaching me how to create Excel macros and small tips and tricks for the entering and organizing of data. I had to suppress the emotional reaction to the soul-rending agony that I was being subjected to, but logically, I knew my plan had worked. The list was real. My stomach dropped and my heart was racing, and I did all I could to prevent myself getting sick right there in the cubicle. Dave finally finished and patted me on the back, retreating towards his office. I took a series of deep breaths and tried to steady myself. I knew the list would come in handy, so I folded it up and tucked it into my pocket in the event I needed it. Safe to say I followed the list religiously that day and tried to leave my cubicle as little as possible, trying to lose myself in my work. 5 o'clock rolled around, but I remained at my desk for a few extra minutes, hoping that if I left late then, I wouldn't accidentally trigger any of the rules. I left a quarter after 5, and Dave waved at me from his office as I walked out. "Hey, thanks for staying late, bud. Keep it up." I shuddered. I reached the front door of the building and sighed as I stepped outside, loosening my tie somewhat. I lit a cigarette and stood in the fresh air for a minute, enjoying the silence and stillness of the parking lot. I began to walk to my car, which was parked in the corner of the lot next to an unused dumpster. I leaned against my car door, finished my smoke, and tossed it on the ground, grinding it out under my shoe. I got inside my car and rubbed my face in exasperation. I turned the engine on and merely sat for a moment, letting the AC wash over me. It was then that I noticed a strange sound from my right, as if someone was trying to open the car door. I ignored it for a moment before it became too violent to be nothing. I looked to my right and beheld something straight from a horror movie. The dumpster lid was propped open and a huge black tentacle, dripping with some sort of red-green ooze, had slithered out of it and was trying to wrench my car door open. I screamed and slammed the car into reverse, backing halfway across the parking lot. The dumpster shook violently, and it seemed I had ripped a piece of the tentacle free. I slammed the car into drive and peeled off down the street as fast as I could safely go. I got home and yanked the sheet of rules out of my pocket. I flipped the page over where I saw that the list of rules continued on to the other side, and thought in stunned silence, how did I miss this? P.S. or Rule 11 or whatever, there's some weird Lovecraft monster thing that lives in the old dumpster in the parking lot. It's pretty harmless though, I think. I always took the bus. Anyway, good luck. Okay, that's not as bad as I thought, I said to myself as I heaved a sigh of relief. I fell into a fitful sleep and had nightmares of the office all night. I woke up early and rubbed my face. I was in way over my head, but I knew I had to persevere. I had to. This is what being an adult is about. And come on, the money is good. I can put up with a list of strange rules for a few months at least so that I can pay my bills off. I stopped at Tim Hortons on the way to work and picked up some breakfast. I got to the office early and parked an extra stall away from the dumpster, which rattled slightly as I got out of my car. I smiled and tossed the extra muffin I had bought into the dumpster and heard what I can only imagine was a metallic squeal of delight from the beast inside. I nodded my head to the dumpster and headed inside. I filled my coffee and got to my cubicle, bracing myself for the day ahead and going over the rules mentally, making sure I hadn't forgotten anything. A few hours into my shift, I was startled by a voice behind me. "Hey Daniel," the overly friendly Carol said from behind me. "It's Jeremy's birthday tomorrow, and I thought we could all chip in a bit to get him a cake and a card." I knew what to do. "Hey Carol, you bet. Just working on the Coventry account here. Let me get my wallet." Ooh, Coventry, very important. I stared at my wallet in bare-faced horror. Rule 7, I had broken Rule 7. I had put cash in my wallet for just this occasion, but in my ignorance, had spent it at Tim Hortons that morning. "Oh, that's no problem, dear. I know you youngins don't carry cash on you these days." Carol smiled at me as the blood began to drain from my face. "You sure?" I asked in a shaking voice. "Of course. I have a great story of when Dave forgot to chip in for Kayla's birthday, that old lout." Carol began, leaning against the wall of my cubicle. "So, it was 2007, and I'd only been here for about 7 years. Or was it 8? It might have been 8. Steven, how long was I here in 2007 when Dave messed up Kayla's birthday? Anyway, sorry, so I had eaten some new cereal for breakfast that morning, so I was a little bit off, but Dave, you see," Carol's voice faded into a murmuring torrent that flowed in one ear and out the other. I hoped she wouldn't notice how pale I was. "I can't believe I broke Rule 7. There truly are some fates worse than death." Rain splattered against my cracked windshield. The engine of my 2004 Toyota Camry screeched, echoing in the surrounding darkness. I tried to keep a proper grip on the trembling steering wheel. The whole damn car was rumbling. I prayed I would make it home, at least. I usually don't drive home from work without music. Tonight, however, I had to do two things: let my thoughts settle after the outburst I had at work, and listen attentively to the engine, making sure it didn't explode on me or whatever. I'm not a mechanic, but that sound it gave off didn't sound normal at all. Fuck, I thought to myself, I'm gonna need a new job, as soon as possible. As if laughing at my misfortune, the engine roared and shuddered. Fuck you too, I murmured. I was about 30 minutes from home, driving on the back roads to avoid the highway. Being surrounded by forest on either side gave off an unsettling feeling. It didn't help that the flickering headlights struggled to fight with the abundance of darkness. Goosebumps shot up all over my body as my mind started imagining stupid scenarios. What if a ghost appeared in the middle of the road? And what if Slenderman is lurking in those woods? All those scary stories took a toll on my mental health. In an attempt to drown out my thoughts, I turned up the radio. At that point, I couldn't care less if the engine exploded on me. It'd be doing me a favor. I flicked through some stations. The typical radio songs played, like Doja Cat and Imagine Dragons. I found one song that sounded good, but the radio station bleeped out every other word. I sighed, continuing to press the worn-out seek button. Channel 505.1 nearly caused me to swerve out of the road. My tires spun and squealed as I straightened the steering wheel. What if a ghost appeared in the middle of the road? Or what if Slenderman is lurking in those woods? My voice reverberated throughout the car speakers. My lips were sealed shut. I didn't say that. What the fuck? I thought to myself, what the fuck? I said through the radio, why the fuck is my voice in the radio? Was I losing it? Was I losing it? I'm just tripping. Maybe those sleepless nights are catching up to me. I pushed the seek button, my fingers shaking. Channel 505.2 came up. This is it. A female voice said through the radio, no one cares and no one will ever care. They just want me for my fucking body. Yet, I keep falling for it, hoping one of the men who says they're different actually means it. Pathetic. This is it. Do it. The radio turned to static. My eyes stayed glued to the road, glowing letters displaying 505.2 in my peripheral vision. What kind of song was that? I brushed it off as some sort of outro to a love song and reached to press the seek button again. Before I could press it, a raspy male voice said, "Sorry about that, folks. It appears we've lost connection to this brainwave frequency. That can only mean one thing." He sighed. "Our deepest condolences to this person's family. Anyways, stay tuned as we connect to our next brain." What the fuck? This is impossible. Was this a prank? Maybe some bored radio workers. If that was the case, why was my voice? Holy shit. I pressed the previous button. Channel 505.1 popped up. Maybe some bored radio workers. My voice said through the radio. It also turned to static. The same raspy voice said, "Well, that was something, huh? It's rare when someone is aware." We'll get right back to his thoughts after this short commercial break. Stay tuned. I turned off the radio and glanced around the car as if expecting to see hidden cameras. There had to be a logical explanation for this. How does one connect to brainwave frequencies? I'm no neuroscientist, but I'm 99.9% sure that's impossible. If this is true, why was I tuned into it? How was I tuned into it? Up ahead, the forest was ending, meaning I was about 5 minutes from home now. I need to sleep. My mind was playing tricks on me. Yeah, that's what it was. That's the only thing that made sense. I chuckled at myself and murmured, a radio station that plays people's thoughts. I've officially lost it. After 5 uneventful minutes, I pulled into my apartment complex and parked in front of my apartment. The rain still pattered softly on the roof of my car. As I turned off the engine, a heavy silence settled over the vehicle. Steam seeped up from the hood as if the car was sighing with relief. I stepped out and hurriedly walked to my front door, fumbling with my keys. After I entered, I stumbled over something, a small pile of objects I couldn't quite make out. I flicked on the light switch to find it was one of many dirty piles of clothes. My mother's voice echoed in my mind, "When I'm gone, I won't be around to clean up after you. Quit being lazy." My lips curled up to a smile and I picked up the clothes one by one. After I finished cleaning up, I grabbed one of the liquor bottles from my kitchen counter. My kitchen doubled as a living room. I never thought it was odd to have carpet flooring in there until I invited a girl over. She laughed at the random stains and never called me back. Whatever, it is what it is. I sunk down on my ripped couch with a sigh. My mistake. The living room tripled as a kitchen and mini gym. There are a few dumbbells and barbells in the far corner, as well as a pull-up bar in the doorway to my room. I turned on the smart TV and loaded up Spotify. I shuffled through songs while taking sips of alcohol. Welcome back to Stream Mind. I am your host, Bob. Tonight we're connecting to the mind of a struggling father with a wife and 2 daughters. Safe to say we can expect stressful thoughts. The raspy voice chuckled. What the fuck? I looked at the tequila bottle as if it was causing me to hallucinate. I've only had 3 sips and there's no way they kicked in this fast. Plus, it's alcohol. It's not like it can even cause hallucinations. The man continued, before we get started, I want to thank all of you for listening. I won't lie, this started as a science experiment. But as the stream skyrocketed, we decided to brand ourselves as a business. I can't stress how much y'all mean to us. As always, enjoy. My heart raced. A chill shot up my spine. This was real. They're tapping into people's minds. This has got to be illegal. I gulped down another shot of liquor. The father's thoughts played. I'm gonna fucking kill her. Who the hell does she think she is, saying she's taking the kids this week? No, she is gonna die. My eyes widened. Better yet, the father continued, I'm gonna kill all of them. I'm working my ass off to provide for this ungrateful family. Why should I even continue? Anger surged through me. It practically sobered me up. After a pause, he continued. His voice was shaky. What am I thinking? Why would that ever cross my mind? I couldn't pull my eyes away from the screen. A part of me wanted to shut it off and pretend this never happened. The other part of me knew this father was a ticking time bomb. I had to do something. I should report this to the police. But how? What would I say? How would they know where to find the man? I took another swig of tequila, hoping it would numb my anger and unease. The thoughts took a darker turn. No, I should just end it all. Drive off a cliff and take them with me. They don't deserve to live if they're going to ruin my life. My chest tightened. I stood and paced around the living room, the thoughts still playing in the background. The thoughts got cut short. Well, Bob said, it's clear that man was demented. I mean, did you listen to his conflicting thoughts? Wow, he chuckled. He's using this for content. My blood boiled. I'll tell y'all what. A man like that does not deserve to live. Wouldn't y'all agree? I stopped in my tracks, facing the glow of the TV like a deer in headlights. If anyone tuning in is interested in dealing with him, his name is Jasper. His address is 38 Jegger Royal Lane. 38 Jegger Royal Lane, my mind repeated. I looked around, grabbing a pen and paper from my coffee table, then writing down the address. Anywho, our next connection will come after this short commercial. I shut off the TV and stood in darkness. My mind raced like a lone ranger riding through an open field. I marched to the corner of the living room and started curling the dumbbells. I had to channel this anger somewhere. As I worked out, my mind was churning. I knew I couldn't just sit by and let this continue. Reporting it to the police might be an option, but I had no concrete evidence, just a chilling broadcast. And what if they traced it back to me somehow? I couldn't afford to put myself in danger. And what if no one else decides to take action? That man will do something terrible. I must take action. 3 days passed. I spent my saved money to buy a Glock 19. It's scary how easy it was to get. Just talked to a few crackheads and they hooked me up with a local dealer after making sure I wasn't the feds. Once I bought it, I watched multiple videos on how to handle and properly clean a Glock 19. I also wrote goodbye notes to all my remaining family and friends. It's set up to send itself out in a month if I don't check back. I didn't plan to die, but just in case, I did some research. Jasper didn't live too far away from me, 23 minutes away, according to the GPS. I packed up some food and supplies, then headed out. The drive was uneventful. I sat in silence the whole time, praying my car would make the trip. I didn't dare turn on the radio again. I couldn't stand listening to another second of that intrusive and sick station. I pulled into Jasper Street. He lived in the suburbs. The houses on either side had white picket fencing. The lawns were almost unnaturally green and well manicured. Heads turned as my beat-up car drove by. The squealing engine caused them to gossip. Dramatic as fuck, acting like they've never seen a car like this before. I parked my car 3 houses down from Jasper's house. There were no cars in the driveway. I assumed he's out working. I tucked my Glock 19 into my jeans and stepped outside. I walked to Jasper's house, fake smiling at people who walked by. I approached Jasper's 2-story house. It was painted a dark shade of blue and trimmed hedges lined the front yard. Taking a deep breath, I walked up the driveway into the front door. I've never broken into anyone's house before. I thought I'd ring the bell and make sure no one was home first. I didn't dress like a robber anyway. I'm wearing blue jeans with a black polo shirt. I pressed the doorbell and took a step back, trying to appear casual while adrenaline surged through my veins. I heard shuffling from behind the door. The locks clicked and the door opened a crack. Jasper's face appeared. His eyes were bloodshot and bore heavy eye bags. An overgrown beard took up 1/3 of his face. "Hey, oh, do I know ya?" My heart raced in my chest. "Hey, sorry to bother you. I'm new in the neighborhood and just trying to meet some people. My name's Eisen." His gaze softened a bit. "New to the neighborhood, huh? Well, I'm Jasper. Nice to meet you. But look, now's not really a good time. I have to go." "No worries. I wouldn't want to interrupt whatever you got going on." He peeked his head out, eyes darting back and forth. "Cool, thanks." As he was about to shut the door, I stuck my foot in. "Hey, Jasper, before you go, can I ask you something?" He looked down at my foot, his eyes twitching. "What?" "Have you heard of a radio channel called Stream Mind?" "Stream what?" "No." I drew my Glock 19 and aimed it at his temple. My finger wrapped around the trigger. I squeezed 3 times. Jasper's head whipped back. His body went limp. He folded over himself, slamming onto the porch pavement. Blood oozed out of his forehead, forming a pool around him. Watching his eyes roll back into his head felt relieving. I aimed the gun at his chest and fired twice. The bullets ripped through him. Blood splattered on my face and clothes. Whoever said killing someone is difficult is lying. This was easy. I grinned and turned around. There was a crowd of spectators. People stared at me with shell-shocked expressions. The whites of their eyes took up the entire upper half of their faces. I walked past them as if nothing happened and hopped into my Toyota Camry. I cranked the engine, but it wouldn't start. Black smoke rose up from the hood. Fuck. Not now. I twisted the keys. The engine howled. The crowd of spectators walked towards the car. One of them threw a rock. The windshield shattered. Shards flew towards me. I tried to duck, but it wasn't fast enough. My face was stunned by the shower of glass fragments. Blood trickled down my cheeks. I cranked the engine again. It turned on. I put the gear on drive and stomped on the accelerator. My tires spun. The smell of burnt rubber filled the car. I looked back to see the crowd of people running after me on the road. What the hell just happened? Why are they? My car slammed into something. My face whipped forward and slammed on the steering wheel. I looked up with watery eyes. The whole bumper was caved in. Thick, dark smoke obscured the view. What the hell did I hit? I stumbled out of the car. My legs were wobbling. The world I was seeing spun. A migraine hammered the inside of my head. I looped around the front of the car, struggling to keep balance. I hit a fucking telephone pole. The wood of the pole splintered. It was gonna fall. I darted forward and turned back, waiting for it to fall. The crowd of people, they were marching towards me. They held rocks and makeshift weapons. I stumbled back. This was it. My final moments. The crowd walked under the telephone pole. It broke and fell on their heads. They were squashed instantly, driven into the ground like nails. Blood shot out in all directions. It looked like a red tsunami. Holy shit. My whole body struggled to stay upright. Witnessing this made me want to throw up. I knew I had to get out of there. I looked left into the road. An SUV slowed to a stop, looking at the disaster that had just unfolded. There was only one person in the car. Perfect. I hurried towards it. Help. The man inside turned to me, his eyes widening. Oh God. Get in. I'll take you to an ambulance. I looped around to the driver's side. Get in the passenger. I pistol whipped him and dragged him out of the car. He kicked and punched. I pistol whipped him again. I hopped in and stepped on the gas pedal. The chaos shrunk out of sight. In the rear view, I took a right, leaving the street, and zoomed out of there just as the police were rolling in. What the fuck just happened? I thought to myself as I turned on the radio. My vision was tunneled, and I didn't even feel the cuts on my face. The radio was tuned into channel 505.1. What the fuck just happened? My voice said in the speakers. It turned to static. Bob's raspy voice came in. Holy guacamole, ladies and gents. Did y'all just hear that? Those are the thoughts of a psychopath. What does he think this is, GTA 5? He chuckled. Now, if you ask me, a man like that shouldn't be alive, let alone roam free. Wouldn't y'all agree? If you would like to take action, his name is Eisen. He lives in a shitty apartment complex. The address is 505 Arabella Road. Shit. Well, this is it, Reddit. If I survive whatever is coming my way, I'll give you guys an update. Or better yet, stay tuned to channel 505.1. The warmth of the sun had begun to fade by the time Melissa and I arrived at the campsite. Located within one of the oldest forests in our state, we had selected the site primarily due to our shared love of exploration and the outdoors. The air carried a crispness that tickled our senses, and the familiar scent of pine enveloped us, reassuring us that we were deep in nature's embrace. With eager anticipation, we set about pitching our tent, the fabric rustling in the gentle breeze. The dancing flames of our well-lit fire illuminated our surroundings, casting flickering shadows that danced across the nearby trees. As the crackling fire glowed in the darkness, we felt a surge of excitement coursing through our veins. The allure of the unknown beckoned to us, fueling our desire to explore the mysteries that lay hidden within the depths of the woods. Leaving the safety of our campsite behind, we ventured into the enigmatic forest, our senses heightened by anticipation of the adventures that awaited. The serenity of our surroundings gradually gave way to a sense of awe as we marveled at the towering trees, their branches intertwining above us, creating a canopy that obscured the sky. Each step we took, the crunch of fallen leaves beneath our feet, echoed through the silent woods. The twilight hours cast a mystical aura over our journey, the fading light painting long haunting shadows across our path. An uneasy tension settled over our shoulders as the silence of the woods began to buzz with an indiscernible energy. Nervous glances were exchanged between us, and vague whispers of discomfort danced on our lips. Melissa's grip on my hand tightened, mirroring the rapid rhythm of my heart. In hushed voices, we attempted to reassure ourselves that our unease was merely a product of overactive imaginations, but every rustle in the underbrush, every snap of a twig, pushed that reassurance further from our grasp. The vastness of the ancient woods started to transform from a source of excitement to a labyrinth of anxiety. The looming silhouettes of gnarled tree trunks and twisted branches became an obstacle course, challenging us to find our way. We concentrated on retracing our steps, following the trail markers that had helped us navigate the woods in the past. But this time, they seemed deceitful, mischievous even, as they led us astray. Doubt began to creep into our thoughts, seeping through the cracks in our confidence. Panic knotted in the pit of my stomach as it became apparent that we had lost our way. A shiver ran down my spine as our surroundings began to blur, each tree resembling the next, leaving us disoriented and trapped amidst the foreboding wilderness. Melissa's voice quivered with concern, her eyes searching for any signs of our campsite. Even the comforting warmth of our fire felt leagues away. As night began to blanket the forest, stars began to twinkle overhead. But instead of offering solace, they seemed to mock us, distant and indifferent to our struggles. Fear wrapped its icy fingers around our throats, squeezing the last remnants of confidence from our minds. Though we stood side by side, our once unyielding bond now wavered in the face of uncertainty. The forest, once a place of wonder and adventure, had transformed into an oppressive maze that swallowed our hopes and dreams. We knew we had to find a way out, to escape this claustrophobic nightmare. But where could we turn when every direction seemed equally foreign? Each path we chose led us in circles, deepening our feeling of entrapment. Desperation settled in as the realization dawned on us that we were truly lost. The darkness, once a mere backdrop to our exploration, now became an accomplice to our fear, concealing unknown dangers that lurked at every turn. As the moon gently cast its pale glow upon our disheartened figures, casting ethereal shadows that flickered like specters, we couldn't escape the nagging sensation that something else was out there with us. Our hearts raced as we realized that we were not alone in this forest of shadows. Unseen eyes bore into our souls, making every hair on our neck stand on end. The presence of an unknown force grew stronger, its intentions ambiguously threatening. We took tentative steps forward, our senses on high alert, our minds consumed by the eerie aura that pervaded the woods. The once harmonious symphony of nocturnal creatures was replaced by an unsettling silence. It was in that tense moment that we felt the first true whispers of danger, the inescapable feeling that something sinister lurked concealed in the darkness, stalking us with vicious intent. With every crackle of the underbrush, our apprehension grew, as did our resolve to find a way back to safety. Melissa's hand trembled in mine as her fearful gaze searched for any sign of familiarity, any flicker of hope in this labyrinth of despair. We moved forward hesitantly, like prey, sensing the approach of a predator, our steps measured and cautious. But in this newfound depth of darkness, certainty became elusive, and every path seemed to lead us further into the unknown. With no alternative but to keep pushing forward, we pressed on, our determination masking the raw fear that had taken hold of us. The night grew deeper, the blanket of darkness enveloping us in its cold embrace. I could hear the pounding of my heartbeat in my ears, the rhythm becoming one with the ominous silence that enveloped our surroundings. The woods seemed to pulsate with an unnatural energy, a presence that whispered tales of the unknown and invoked a primal fear deep within us. Every rustle of leaves, every gust of wind felt like a prelude to something unimaginable. We were no longer explorers reveling in the thrill of adventure. We had become unwitting participants in a tale that would forever alter the fabric of our reality. As time blurred, the shadows deepened, and the edge between reality and nightmare was fractured. We became mere fragments of what we once were, worn down by the unyielding impediments of the forest and the unspoken specters that haunted us. Yet, as despair threatened to consume us, a flicker of light pierced the suffocating veil of darkness, emerging as a distant glimmer of hope amidst the encroaching threat. Night had fully descended upon the woods, engulfing Melissa and me in its dark embrace. Each passing moment intensified the eerie ambience of the forest, amplifying our growing sense of unease. The trees, once majestic and welcoming, now loomed over us with an ominous presence. Their twisted branches seemed to reach out like skeletal fingers, as if eager to ensnare us within their cold grasp. With careful steps, we navigated the obscure paths that went through the unfamiliar terrain. The trail markers that had once served as our guiding beacon now betrayed us, leading us astray with their deceitful directions. Our footsteps wavered, our confidence quickly eroding as anxiety and doubt gnawed at our minds. Every sound, no matter how distant or faint, echoed with dreadful resonance in the oppressive silence. The rustling of leaves morphed into wicked whispers, as if unseen creatures sought to communicate their sinister intentions. The woods seemed to come alive with malicious actions, conspiring against our very existence. Lost in the disorienting maze, we were mere pawns in this deadly game. The sense of being watched intensified, an invisible gaze that seemed to penetrate our souls. Shadows danced at the corners of our vision, fleeting apparitions that disappeared as we turned to face them. An icy shiver slithered down our spines, freezing our breath in anticipation of an unseen threat. Time lost its meaning in this nocturnal labyrinth. The hours blended together as trepidation clung to our every step. Exhaustion weighed heavily upon us as the darkness persisted, our energy sapped by the relentless pursuit of escape. We fought against mounting despair, holding on to the flickering hope that guided us forward. Through the dense thicket and undergrowth, we trudged onward, hands tightly clasped, seeking solace in each other's presence. Our shared determination tethered us against the encroaching terror, fortifying our spirits in this seemingly never-ending nightmare. Cold tendrils of fear wrapped themselves around our hearts, strangling our courage and threatening to choke out any remnants of hope. Doubt crept into our thoughts, whispering insidious words into our ears. Were we destined to wander these woods forever, trapped in a loop of despair and terror? Each step forward became a desperate bid for survival, a silent plea to the impassive forest to relinquish its grip on our souls. Time became both fleeting and eternal, the weight of the unknown bearing down on us with unforgiving persistence. The forest offered no answers, only relentless mysteries that taunted our fraying sanity. Undiscovered to us, our presence had not gone unnoticed. Unseen by our eyes, a presence lurked in the shadows, sensing our vulnerability and seeking to exploit it. The ancient woods held secrets, and we had unwittingly stumbled upon one of the darkest. Suddenly, the rustling of leaves stopped, replaced by an eerie silence that hung heavily in the air. In that moment, a figure emerged from the depths of the forest, an indistinct shape that seemed to blur the line between man and beast. It moved with an unsettling grace, its form shifting and contorting like liquid darkness. Fear seized our hearts as we realized we were face to face with a skinwalker, a being of ancient lore with the ability to take on the appearance of any creature it desired. Its eyes shine with a malevolent glow, reflecting our own terror back at us. Panic surged within us, urging us to run, but our legs felt as though they were rooted to the ground. The skinwalker's gaze held us captive, its intentions unknown but undeniably sinister. "Stay calm," I whispered to Melissa, feeling the weight of responsibility settle upon my shoulders. "We need to be smart and find a way to protect ourselves." Melissa nodded, her eyes locked on the creature. Together, we frantically searched for any means of defense. Our backpacks held only the typical camping supplies, insufficient against a supernatural foe. As if sensing our desperation, the skinwalker lunged forward, its speed and agility defying human capabilities. Adrenaline coursed through our veins as we dodged its advance, barely escaping its clutches. The creature's guttural growls echoed through the forest, sending a chill down our spines. We retreated, putting distance between ourselves and the skinwalker, seeking refuge in the thick underbrush. Heart pounding, we desperately brainstormed a plan, our minds racing to find a strategy that would keep us alive. As we continued through the woods, our hearts raced with a mixture of fear and determination. The encounter with the skinwalker had shaken us to our core, leaving us on edge, constantly scanning our surroundings for any sign of danger. Melissa and I knew we had to move quickly, reluctant to linger in one place for too long. As we pressed on, desperate to put distance between ourselves and the lurking threat, a cacophony of snapping branches and rustling leaves pierced the silence. We froze, our eyes widening in dread. Without a word, we instinctively knew it was time to run. Panicked footsteps pounded against the forest floor, our breaths ragged as adrenaline surged through our veins. We dashed through the underbrush, each desperate leap carrying us further away from imminent danger. The forest distorted around us, resembling a nightmarish labyrinth that sought to confound our escape. Trees seemingly shifted positions, creating a disorienting maze that threatened to engulf us. The treacherous terrain sent us stumbling and tripping, but the desperation to survive fueled our determination. In the chaos and confusion, we lost sight of one another. Melissa's presence faded into the darkness, leaving me disoriented and alone. Panic consumed me as I called out her name, my voice drowned by the overwhelming silence of the forest. Forced to make a choice, I hurriedly decided to continue moving, hoping that Melissa would do the same. Fear clung to my thoughts, but I reassured myself that she possessed the strength and resilience to endure. A part of me believed that our bond would guide us back to each other. Flashlight in hand, I pressed on, relentless in my pursuit of safety. Every shadowed corner held the potential danger of the unknown, but I pushed back the rising fear and focused on finding a way out of this nightmarish realm. Hours turned into an eternity as I traversed in complete solitude. The forest seemed to swallow me whole, its ancient whispers becoming a haunting soundtrack to my journey. Doubt and guilt gnawed at my mind, tinged with the uncertainty of Melissa's fate. Questions plagued me. Had she encountered more peril, or had she found her way to safety? My steps became heavy, fatigue beginning to wear down my resolve. Doubts threatened to overtake me as the weight of the situation bore down on my shoulders. But then, a glimmer of hope pierced the darkness, a faint glow ahead, like a beacon of salvation. With renewed vigor, I hastened toward the light, yearning for the respite it promised. As I drew closer, the glow revealed itself to be the soft radiance of a moonlit clearing. A sense of cautious relief washed over me, but the knowledge that Melissa was not by my side cast a shadow over my relief. I took a moment to catch my breath, basking in the cool evening air. As I scanned my surroundings, a tattered piece of cloth caught my attention. It hung from a nearby tree branch, its fabric torn and weathered. My heart skipped a beat as I recognized it as a fragment of Melissa's hoodie. A mixture of apprehension and hope flooded my senses, uncertain of what this discovery meant. Had Melissa passed this way? Had she encountered danger or found temporary refuge? The questions taunted my weary mind, urging me to find answers. Resolutely, I made the decision to search for any further signs or clues that would lead me closer to Melissa's whereabouts. I gathered the fragment of cloth, holding it close as a talisman of hope. With the moonlight as my guide, I plunged back into the forest, determined to unmask the secrets hidden within its depths and reunite with Melissa. As I retraced my steps through the dense forest, a sense of unease settled in my chest. The minutes turned into hours as I called out Melissa's name, but there was no sign of her. Anxiety gnawed at me, and I couldn't shake the nagging thought that something sinister may have befallen her. Pushing fear aside, I pressed on, determined to leave no stone unturned in my search for Melissa. Every rustle of leaves or snap of twigs inflated my heart rate, as if amplifying my awareness of the lurking dangers around me. Yet, I couldn't let fear paralyze me. Melissa needed me, and I needed to find her. The moon cast its ethereal glow upon the forest, illuminating my path and guiding my steps. Even as hope flickered within me, a voice in the back of my mind reminded me that time was slipping away. The night was growing colder, and the darkness seemed to thicken as I ventured deeper. With each passing moment, a sense of urgency ignited within me. I switched my focus from calling out her name to meticulously scouring the surroundings, examining every nook and cranny for any signs of her presence. Yet, as my search intensified, the presence of the skinwalkers weighed heavily on my thoughts. At some point, I stumbled upon a clearing, bathed in moonlight and seemingly untouched by the eerie stillness of the forest. My heart raced with anticipation, hoping that this would be the moment I found Melissa safe and sound. But as I stepped closer, my hope dissolved into disappointment. The clearing was serene, devoid of any trace of Melissa. A deep sigh left my lips, mingling with the whispers of the wind. Doubt began to consume me once again. Was it possible that the skinwalkers had taken her? The uncertainty gnawed at my core, but I couldn't allow myself to succumb to despair. I had to keep searching, adapt, and find a way to bring Melissa back. As I pressed on through the treacherous darkness of the forest, my determination to find Melissa burned fiercely within me. Every step forward seemed to carry an air of anticipation, as if the forest itself held its breath, whispering secrets just beyond my reach. Suddenly, a rustling sound echoed through the trees, causing my heart to skip a beat. I spun around, my flashlight cutting through the gloom, and there, illuminated in its beam, were the unmistakable figures of the skinwalkers. Fear surged within me, threatening to paralyze my every move, but I couldn't afford to succumb to it. Melissa's safety depended on my courage and swift action. With a deep breath, I mustered my resolve and faced the dark figures, ready to confront them head-on. The skinwalkers moved with an eerie grace, their shapes shifting and twisting in the flickering light. In my mind, I conjured memories of the stories told about their malevolence and their dangerous abilities. I knew I had to be cautious to protect myself while also trying to find a way to free Melissa from their clutches. As I took a step forward, they lunged at me, their eyes glowing with a haunting intensity. Adrenaline coursed through my veins as I dodged their advance, my senses heightened, desperately searching for an opening. With each evasive maneuver, I moved closer to Melissa, determined to set her free. A chaotic dance ensued, the forest becoming a battleground between the skinwalkers and me. Branches snapped underfoot, leaves rustled, and the moon bore witness to our struggle. Time seemed to stretch, every second a testament to my resilience and unwavering love for Melissa. Finally, seizing a momentary distraction, I broke free from the clutches of the skinwalkers and raced towards a secluded spot where Melissa was held captive. Her eyes met mine, a mix of fear and hope shining within them. Silently, I reassured her that help had arrived. Carefully, I untied the ropes that bound her, our hands trembling but filled with determination. We didn't have a moment to spare. As we made our escape through the dense forest, the skinwalkers pursued us relentlessly, their dark forms never far behind. With each step, our desperation grew, propelling us forward. We navigated through tangled thickets, jumped over fallen trees, and pushed our bodies to the limit. But a small sliver of hope still burned within us, urging us to keep going. Finally, as the first glimpses of dawn painted the sky, we emerged from the depths of the forest. We gasped for breath, our lungs heaving with exhaustion and relief. We had made it. Together, we stumbled back to where we had parked our car, the sense of freedom overwhelming us. We collapsed into the seats, our bodies exhausted but our spirits soaring. The encounter with the skinwalkers had only strengthened our bond, solidifying the depths of our love and the resilience of our will. As I turned the ignition and the car roared to life, Melissa reached out, her hand finding mine. We shared a knowing glance, a silent promise that no matter what challenges lay ahead, we would face them united. Days had passed since our escape from the haunting depths of the forest, and Melissa and I attempted to resume a semblance of normalcy, yet a sense of underlying unease lingered within me, casting a shadow of doubt over our newfound freedom. Subtle changes in Melissa's behavior caught my attention. There were moments when her gaze seemed distant, filled with an otherworldly longing. Her movements became more fluid, her grace seemingly beyond human capabilities. It was as if an invisible barrier stood between us, creating an unsettling disconnect. The weight of uncertainty pressed upon my chest as I looked into Melissa's eyes, longing for a connection that no longer seemed attainable. Yet, it was the way she stared through me, as if gazing into a void beyond my existence, that sent shivers down my spine. The warmth and familiarity that once radiated from her gaze had been replaced by something chillingly distant, leaving me feeling like a stranger in her presence. In the depths of my soul, a chilling realization began to take hold, an eerie understanding that the forest had not stolen Melissa away, but instead, it had birthed something far more sinister. As the whispers of the wind carried an unsettling melody, I couldn't escape the bone-chilling truth that the woman I once knew, the love of my life, had become a haunting presence, an embodiment of the very darkness that had lurked in the depths of those woods. "3 months ago, my wife and I were on our way to visit my mother-in-law, living alone far up in the White Mountains. I had been driving for 5 hours, and my wife, Betty, started saying she needed to use the bathroom and that she was starving. My full bladder agreed with her on the first issue, though I also had tried to make good time and get there before nightfall, when the street signs would become harder to read. I had never been to Betty's mother's house before, or even the county it lay in. I pulled over the car on the side of Main Street, looking down the center of the town. It had everything a small, rural American town usually had: quaint houses with blue siding, 24-hour diners, hardware stores and tobacco shops, liquor stores and restaurants. Majestic mountains rose all around us, and the town itself was so high that I could see for miles. The air smelt clean and sweet. Everything was here except... no people, my wife said, as if reading my mind. I looked over at her, frowning. Yeah, this is bizarre, I said. This place looks like it was hit by the Black Death. Where is everyone? My wife unlocked her door and got out, pulling a cigarette from her purse and lighting it. She gave the pack to me and I took one. My wife looked pale and thin under the late afternoon sun, her black hair and dark eyes contrasting heavily with her light, Irish skin. Lately, she seemed to have lost weight, but she wouldn't talk about it. Every time I asked her if anything was wrong, she said no, and I could get no more response from her than that. The fragrant Turkish tobacco of the Camel cigarette instantly woke me up. We didn't smoke in the car, as it was brand new and had cost me over $25,000 that I didn't really have. The last thing I wanted was burn marks on the seats and ashes flying everywhere. We walked slowly down the sidewalk, looking around, searching for the slightest signs of movement. I didn't even see an animal, except for an occasional fly buzzing past on its way eating trash. I looked into the diner window and saw plates set out on the tables. Mold grew wild on the food, strange patches of green and red and black sprouting filaments and making the dishes unrecognizable. Next to the plates, I saw cell phones and even car and house keys. All the screens on the phones looked black, as if they had been sitting there for months. A slight layer of grime and dust had settled over everything. The door stood wide open, a cheerful sign reading, "We're open. Come in," displayed on the front. "That's gotta be a code violation," I said, pointing inside at the disgusting plates of mold and fungus. My wife laughed, but it sounded nervous and high-pitched, almost desperate in its cadence. "Listen, Betty, do you think we should? Maybe call the police or something?" She looked at me for a long moment, then sighed. "I mean, I don't know," she said. "What crime has been committed? It's just an empty town. Maybe everyone's at a funeral." Her voice raised hopefully. I laughed. "And they just abandoned their shops and restaurants with no workers and moldering food. And, by the way, there's a cop car right there," I said, pointing. It sat on 4 flat tires, covered in a thick coat of dust. The tires didn't look damaged in any way. It seems they had just lost pressure over time without anyone to care for them. Looking around at the other cars, I saw most were not in much better shape. Many of them had low or no air in their tires, and their windshields were covered in dirt and grime. It looked like a junkyard in the middle of a town, a junkyard that had been abandoned. "I'm calling the cops," I said, pulling out my phone. I opened the screen and, of course, found I had no service. I tried sending a text to my mother explaining the situation and telling her to call the cops if she received it and send help immediately. I gave her the name of the town and the time. I figured the chances of a text going through were far better than a call, since a brief moment of service could prove sufficient to transfer the message. "Yeah, I'm not calling the cops." I shook my head. "We don't have a shred of service out here. What kind of town doesn't have service on its own main street?" "We are in the middle of the mountains," Betty said. "Who the hell knows out here?" We kept walking down the street in silence. Betty went inside a few of the shops and tried flicking on the lights or looking for a phone. The electricity was apparently as dead as the town itself. I occasionally checked my phone, finding nothing had changed. As we walked further along, I started to give up hope that help would be coming from outside. I finished my cigarette, and Betty lit another one and gave me the pack again. I sighed and took another Camel out of the pack, lighting it, and inhaling deeply. It gave me something to do, at least, and it helped take my mind off the strangeness of this town. Then we came up to the police station, and I choked on the smoke as I saw what lay there before us. At first, I thought some vandal had used red spray paint to put up a bizarre slogan across the front of the station, and then I saw all the flies and smelled the copper and iron, and I realized it likely wasn't paint at all. We followed the black sun. It said in huge letters, each of them nearly 6 feet tall and thickly painted across the windows and walls. My wife squinted at it, tilting her head in a girlish way, her black hair falling across her face. She took a long, thin hand and pushed it aside. "The Black Sun," she said. "Is that a metal band? It sounds like those Norwegian Satanists you like to listen to. What's the name? Burzum and Darkthrone and stuff." She started walking forwards, trying to inspect the letters more closely. I put my hand on her shoulder and pulled her back with a little more force than I intended. She stumbled and gave me a dirty look. "Johnny, be careful, damn it. You almost made me fall." "Sorry," I said, my heart pounding in my chest, "but don't get close to that. I'm fairly sure that's blood, and it might be a crime scene. You don't want to touch it or trample the area if it is." She looked at me, shocked, then glanced back at the letters, seeing the flies swarming around the coagulated, sticky mess. "Animal blood?" she asked helpfully. "Yeah, sure, I guess," I said noncommittally. "Okay, let's go back to the car and get the hell out of here. I've seen enough. We need to get the cops here. Whatever is going on here, it's way beyond anything we can deal with." I turned around quickly, taking my wife's hand. She pulled away. "Don't start getting all worked up," she said. "We haven't seen any indication of anything crazy, not yet. All we know is the people are somewhere, not here, and that someone vandalized the police station. I want to keep exploring." I looked at her, amazed. She pointed past me at an old-looking church built of stone, probably from the 1800s. It stood near the end of the small downtown area, next to thick clusters of evergreen trees. It had a plaque outside that I couldn't make out. The doors stood wide open, and the darkness inside seemed to beckon. For a moment, I almost agreed with Betty. I almost said that I, too, wanted to go inside that church. I think it was what the French call l'appel du vide, or the call of the void, that urge to suddenly jump when standing at the edge of a cliff, or to see if a car can go 130 miles an hour on the highway when it's snowing. Then I shook my head quickly, as if awakening from a short dream. I looked back at Betty and laughed. There was no humor in it, however. "You must be crazy," I said. "I want to get the hell out of here, now. There's nothing to explore. Everyone's gone, and if we keep going deeper into this, I have a feeling we'll run into something far worse than anything we've yet seen." "Okay, how about this?" she said, making a thoughtful face, putting her finger up to her chin. "Why don't you see if the cop car is unlocked, jump it with our car, and use whatever they have in it to call for help? They probably have a walkie-talkie or something connected to the state police network. If you really think we need a SWAT team here, then that's probably the quickest way. No, let's just leave, I said, walking quickly back in the direction of our car. I saw the new Chevrolet Trailblazer off in the distance, contrasting heavily with the dirty and abandoned cars surrounding it. And then, as we got close, I saw it had 4 flat tires. I started running forwards, seeing the deep knife marks slicing open each of the sidewalls. What in the hell? I said, stopping in my tracks. I looked around the town, but still saw no trace of anyone. Why would someone do this? To stop us from leaving, obviously, my wife said, sounding unperturbed. Look, we might be here for a while, so I'm going into that package store and grabbing a few things. Maybe some wine, and some cigarettes, because someone smoked most of mine. She narrowed her eyes at me playfully. Do you even realize what's happening right now? I asked, my voice rising unconsciously in anger and frustration. No, do you? She said. This isn't a joke, I said, feeling hot and anxious. We're trapped here and there's letters written in blood, and now someone slashed our tires. Do you still think we don't need the police? She smiled at me. You always worry too much, she said. Just calm down for once. Don't have an anxiety attack on me. There's no cell phone service to call for help if you do, remember. That jogged something in my memory, and I looked questioningly at her. Do you have any weapons on you? I asked. I have. I reached in my pockets, frowning. I pulled out a small Swiss Army knife. Its red surface looked dull from age, and even I thought it looked small and pathetic in my hand. This, she laughed. What are you going to do with that? Kill a chipmunk? She asked. I mean, I think you can cut your nails with it, too, if you want to use a dull, crappy pair of scissors that barely cut paper. She laughed at her own joke, then stopped when she saw the anger and fear on my face. Betty looked at me with a strange expression. It was hard to perturb her. She had always been different from me. When I was stressed about money or work or anything else, she would laugh it off and say I was too serious. But this seemed to be stretching the boundaries. I felt in my heart we were in danger, and she didn't seem to notice. Look, she continued, sighing, let's go get some more cigarettes and drinks and stuff, and then maybe we can take the car over to the police cruiser and jump it. Then we can call the cops and triple a 2 and just sit here and wait for the cavalry to arrive. I sputtered. This is a brand new car. I yelled. I'm not driving it on the rims over there. That's going to destroy the rotors and could damage some other stuff. I didn't actually know anything about cars, and she knew it. No, I think it will be fine, she said, smiling. But I wouldn't get my... Her words were cut off by a siren that started up suddenly, deafening and shrill. It seemed to vibrate the air itself, and the dead town came to life in a cacophony of noise and vibration. I saw my wife's lips moving as she tried to scream something, but I had no idea what it was. I covered my ears with my hands, which barely helped. And then, after about 10 seconds, it stopped. My ears rang, a high-pitched whine like I had just walked into a flashbang. It went away slowly, and Betty's voice came back to me, rising from nothingness in a crescendo until I could make out her cadence and speech again. Into the siren, she said, her face unusually serious and drawn. The sun had started to go behind the mountains now, sending long shadows streaking across the road. Soon, it would be dark, and we would likely be trapped here for the entire night or longer. Hiking out of here was an option, and the highway was only about 5 miles away. These thoughts passed through my mind as I saw shadows fall over Betty before I realized I had no idea what she said. What? I yelled. I said. She rolled her eyes at this point. We should go towards the siren. They have electricity. They probably have a landline and maybe there's people there, she said, still speaking far too loudly. I guess her ears were ringing as well. Okay, you don't have to yell, I said. I can hear you and I don't want to attract the wrong kind of attention. She pointed at the sliced tires of my car. We already have, Johnny, she said seriously. Listen, I don't like this, I said. I don't want to be trapped in some nutjob's basement a few hours from now, chained up against a wall and covered in blood, and think back on how I should have done something different. I think the safest plan is to leave this place now, right now. Let's just grab some drinks and cigarettes and whatever from the store and hike back towards the highway on the main route. Maybe we'll see someone on the walk, but we'll definitely find help on the highway. She thought about it for a fraction of a second, then nodded. Okay, whatever, she said. Let's go. The plan worked at first. Betty ran into the package store while I kept watch outside, looking up and down the street for any signs of movement. I saw nothing, but from the slashed tires, I assumed we were being watched. Whoever they were, they knew when we were far enough away to vandalize the car. A minute later, Betty came out with a plastic bag. I saw 9 or 10 cartons of cigarettes in it, and some plastic nips of Jack Daniels. She also had Coca-Cola and some water. I thought you were grabbing a pack of cigarettes, I said, narrowing my eyes. 10 cartons. Why do we need 10 cartons for a 5-mile hike? We don't need them, she said, but, you know, they're expensive down in Connecticut. Much cheaper in this town. Yes, I guess you can't beat free, I said, reaching into the bag and taking out a pack. We started walking out of town in silence. I didn't even hear an animal stir. The regular buzz of the insects that chirped and squeaked throughout the White Mountains was missing here. It gave the town a supernatural eeriness, as if we had wandered into an apocalyptic wasteland where even the crickets had died. To break the monotony, I lit a cigarette. The flick of the lighter and the soft tread of our footsteps were the only sounds we could hear for miles. As we got further down Main Street, the shops and houses started to thin out. Soon after we passed the church, both sides of the street had turned to forest, and only an occasional house or farm broke the endless trees. The downtown area couldn't be more than a quarter-mile long, but this town and the surrounding forest felt like it went on forever. This is really spooky, Betty said, shattering the silence. I was glad for a break, though I felt eyes on me as she spoke, as if we had somehow violated the sanctity of a graveyard with laughter. I have never experienced anything as weird as this, I said, whispering and getting close to Betty. I noticed she also spoke in a quiet voice, and she constantly glanced behind and around. She smoked a lot of cigarettes, nervously lighting one after the other, and she drank 3 of the nips on the way, chasing them down with Coke. I took one myself and downed it. The burning liquid seemed to revive me somewhat and clear my head. I chugged some soda to get the taste out of my mouth. Betty had opened her mouth to say something else when the screaming erupted from all around us. The sun had long disappeared behind the mountains, and we were surrounded by thick curtains of darkness. I couldn't see more than a few feet into the forest. Betty gripped my hand tightly. Okay, now I am really freaked out, she whispered into my ear. We had both stopped and stood, holding hands as shrieks echoed through the trees. The light breeze carried a smell that nearly made me gag, the smell of decay and blood. Do you think it's a fox or a fish or cat or something? I shook my head silently, then leaned close to her. We're going to run, I said, back towards the town. It's a lot closer. Ready? She nodded grimly. Go. We started sprinting away, our footsteps bouncing off the pavement, far too loud. The screaming drew closer and something broke through the outer boundary of the woods. With twigs crunching and branches snapping, I saw a silhouette emerge into the road to my left. The smell of rotting flesh seemed overwhelming now. I only saw her for a second, but I knew, in that moment, that she wasn't human. It looked like a woman, or at least, like the corpse of one. But she was clearly alive in some form, running and shrieking, sending out wails of pure agony and horror. The eyes snapped onto me. I met them for a brief moment. Even in the dim light of the moon and the stars, I could see they were pure white, without pupils or irises, and yet they seemed to see everything, even in the deepening shadows. Long stringy black hair ran down over her face and down her back. Papery skin hung tightly to the skull, and the mouth hung wide open, inhumanly wide, like the tendons and ligaments holding the jaw to the skull had been cut. The huge black pit of her mouth emanated those screams constantly, as if she didn't need to breathe. On the body, parts of the skin were missing. I could see the gore and bones beneath, where the thin, fragile skin had broken. Purple and black sores shined from these spots. The long, skeletal hand of the woman ended up with claw-like fingers, with the nails blackened and the bones sticking out at the end of each digit. She ran fast, gaining on us, and she wasn't alone. I could see dozens more bodies breaking through the tree line now, a deafening howling emanating from them as they ran. I was breathing hard by this point. I could see the first buildings of the town up ahead. We only had to make it another 100 paces, and then we could lock ourselves in and barricade the doors and windows. I didn't dare look back, but I heard the screaming just behind me. I felt a soft swipe across my back, the sharp, bony fingers dragging across the shirt for a brief moment. It gave me another adrenaline rush, and I pushed myself forward with all of my will, feeling my heart beating far too fast in my chest. I began to feel lightheaded and see flashes of white light every time I blinked. I knew I would pass out if I had to go much farther. I hadn't gone running in over 10 years, probably since I was in high school, but I ran for my life just the same. Betty was in better shape than me, and she had gained some ground. She glanced back as she sprinted down the middle of the dark street. I saw her point to the church. It stood just ahead. The doors already opened, as if waiting for us, as if it knew we would be back. She veered sharply to the right and I followed close behind, panting and sweating like a madman. The doors were so close now. The shrieking behind me had been joined by a few others. With the last of my strength, I began an all-out sprint, hoping I wouldn't trip over something and go flying into a car. It would mean the end of me if that, I was certain. We ran through the doors into the church. I turned around and saw the creatures had gone, their screaming cut off as soon as we had entered, and now I saw no sign of them. It was as if they had vanished. I shut the doors of the church just the same, turning a deadbolt to lock them. Betty had her phone out, turning on the flashlight app to help me see in the dark church. I would have to also check for auxiliary entrances, but it was a start, just the same. And then I turned, and I saw what Betty had already noticed: the desecration of this holy place. The statue of Jesus on his cross had been broken off at the bottom of the beam, and now hung upside down from a rope that extended to the high ceiling, dozens of feet above our heads. His face had been slashed and cut, his nose and eyes now missing, and on the front of his chest, I saw a strange symbol carved deeply into the wood with what looked like blood. The sigil looked like an upside-down triangle within a larger upside-down triangle, and had lines curving out of the sides of the bottom, connected to the lines of the larger triangle. At the bottom, I saw a line curving like a J, and on the other side, another line curved like a backwards one. The lines extended outwards, curving over a V. Around the sigil sat a thick, black circle. It definitely seemed magical, like something from a medieval textbook on witchcraft. "That's the sigil of Lucifer," my wife said quietly. "How do you know that?" I asked, and she shrugged. "I read a couple books on black magic when I was a teen," she said. "That one stuck with me for some reason. That symbol, it's eerie. I never forgot it." I looked over at the font at the front of the church. Instead of holy water, I saw it was filled with blood. "I guess no one's crossing themselves in here today," I said, trying to break the harsh terror that threatened to overwhelm us. Then, as Betty moved her light around, I realized we weren't alone in here. People sat in the pews, their heads bowed, silently praying. Dozens of people were in here with us, yet they made no noise, and no one turned their heads to look at us or say anything. An icy chill ran down my spine. I turned to Betty and pointed at the people. "Yeah, I see them," she whispered, and began to creep slowly forward. I took out my phone and turned on my light as well, moving silently a few feet behind her. I shined the light at the first pew of people and gasped. They all had their throats cut. A waterfall of thick, coagulated blood stained the front of their bodies. The smell hit me at once, an overwhelming odor of rotting meat and iron. I gagged, turning to retch. Betty pulled me towards the back of the church. I searched for any other entrances, locking the ancient deadbolts on the doors. We ended up going to the rectory in the back, sitting on the priest's couch. There were no bodies in here, and no smell but the musty scent of an old building and books. "Well," Betty said, turning to me, barely concealing the terror in her eyes, "it looks like we found the townspeople, some of them, anyways." I said nothing, but instead put my phone down and sat in the darkness with her, putting my arm around her while she cried. I've never really been able to talk about it. I still feel it, though, in my dreams. Eyes on me late at night. A presence matching my pace, walking from my car to the front door of my apartment. I can't shake it. My therapist suggested I need to tell someone, that I need some sort of catharsis so I can finally shake what happened that day and move on with my life. How can someone move on from something like this? There is forever or before and after. The carefree, open, bright-eyed me, and the me that has to triple-check the door is locked at night. The me that got a concealed carry permit and stops at the gun range after work 5 days a week. But maybe even if I can't move on, you'll get something out of this. Even if it's just a warning. California was always my dream vacation, so when my friend decided to have her bachelorette party there, I was ecstatic. It was expensive, sure, but it's not like there was a lot else I was spending my money on. I didn't have kids or a partner. My fish food budget wasn't exactly leaving me destitute. It would be a once-in-a-lifetime trip. The plan was to go camping for a week at Yosemite National Park. A little unconventional, but the bride-to-be, Annette, was always a bit of a crunchy granola girl. I'd never been camping before. I was excited. I was so stupid. Focus. Deep breaths. Okay, I'd spent my entire life on the east coast of the United States. Sure, we had mountains, the rolling, gentle green peaks of Appalachia, but nothing could have prepared me for the reality of the Sierra Nevada. Jagged granite spurs and sheer rock faces, too young to have been worn smooth by time. It radiated a fierce, wild, untamed beauty, and entering Yosemite Valley felt like crossing the threshold into a place of worship. It took my breath away. Camping on the valley floor wasn't enough for Annette, though. It was too touristy, according to her. Too many people around. The real Yosemite experience would be camping up in the high country, up the mountain, surrounded by trees and with some semblance of isolation. Of course, we weren't entirely alone. There were 5 of us at our campground, up near a rather stunning rock formation known as Half Dome. Other campers were within shouting distance, but at night, it truly felt like we were off in some great wilderness. I keep coming back to that thought. It felt like we were. There wasn't any feeling about it. I was just too sheltered to realize. The first day was fine, pleasant, even. We dipped our feet into glacial springs and took group photos at the foot of waterfalls. After night fell, we roasted marshmallows and frightened each other with campfire stories and made sure we put all of our food up in bear bags. 5 is an odd number. Our tents were meant to sleep 2 people apiece. One of us could have insisted on cramming in with the others, but nobody wanted to be an inconvenience. I didn't want to have to share my space, so I ended up sleeping by myself. I didn't realize how hyper alert I was until I tried to close my eyes. Every branch rustling, every crunch of underbrush, and the distant howl of coyotes all quiet in their own right, but together they blended into a cacophony that left me anxious and bleary-eyed come morning. We had to be up early. We planned for a hike the second day, nothing intense. It was fine. There was just a sense I had. Maybe some leftover animal sense, back when living like this was mankind's normal, but the sense we were being tracked. You're such a city girl, Annette laughed when I mentioned this to her. There's all sorts of animals out here. There's probably something there, but it's not anything you have to worry about. I tried to laugh it off too. I pushed it aside, enjoying the bright California sun and the clear mountain air. I pushed it aside until that second night, where I had to get up to pee. It was past midnight, and the fire had been long since extinguished. I had a little bit of a leftover buzz from a joint I'd smoked before bed, hoping to ease some of my sleeplessness. Trying not to wake my friends, I unzipped my tent, tiptoeing by the light of my flashlight to get some tree cover in between myself and the campsite. Before I did my business, I shuffled out, cursing men for their ability to hold a flashlight and pee in the woods at the same time. I'd just crossed into the tree line when I heard it, a snuffling, soft, like a dog sniffing around a blanket, but the footfalls were much too heavy for it to be anything canine-sized. A bear. I swung my flashlight around. A bear bag creaked against the rope to which it was tied. I don't need to be scared of bears, I told myself. They're afraid of me too. There's not a lot of underbrush in Yosemite. Forest fires burn away any thick brush that grows, and whatever was making noise didn't have a lot of places to hide. But I didn't see it. I heard it, and whatever it was sounded like it was getting closer. I wanted to yell or to make myself big, but I couldn't get my throat to work. I felt paralyzed. All I could do was step slowly back towards my tent, groping blindly behind me. It sounded so close. Nothing was there. I darted through the tent flap and zipped it shut in one swift motion, using my flashlight to see if I could detect a silhouette against the cloth of my tent. Nothing was there. I'm not sure how, but I eventually fell asleep. This didn't last long, because at the break of dawn, I awoke to the sound of complaining. Again, I crawled out of my tent, exhausted. The girls were collecting bits of trash, food wrappers, and napkins that had been spread all through the camp. Something got into our supplies. Annette told me that the bear bag was fine. I saw it last night. I said, well, whatever it was, it went to town, she answered, slashed a hole right into the cloth, and tore everything out. I bit my lip for a moment, thinking, I thought I heard something last night. I said sheepishly, I thought I might have imagined it. Guess not, said Annette. Guess not. That day, instead of horseback riding like we intended, was spent moving our campsite. We let the park rangers know what happened, and they let us get a permit for a different spot. They didn't want us at risk from a nuisance bear. It just didn't feel right. Sure, black bears weren't huge, but it wouldn't be small enough to hide when it sounded so close to me. When it was big enough to reach 10 feet in the air and rip our bag open, nobody else seemed worried, so I dropped it. I dropped it and decided to have fun, and the next night nothing happened, and I thought that meant we were safe. I thought it meant I could relax. I thought I could ignore all my instincts telling me something is horrifically wrong. Day 4, we were going out to the lake near our new campsite. It was blue, icy cold, bordered by idyllic wildflower meadows and redwood groves. Picture perfect. I was still tired and didn't feel up for swimming. Instead, I decided to stay back and sunbathe on the beach while my friends rented a couple of canoes and paddled up and down the lake. When I say I was sunbathing, what I really meant is that I was people watching. It's just a lot easier when you have sunglasses on and nobody realizes you're looking at them. From my vantage point on the beach, I could see a group of frat guys daring each other to do flips off a rock into the water. A family with 2 young sons splashed around in the shallows. At another spot, a middle-aged couple was making out, like nobody was around. Guess this must be their second honeymoon, huh? A man's voice said. I jumped, startled, and turned to see another sunbather on a blanket near me. I hadn't realized anyone else was nearby. Probably hard to get a room out here, I replied. I'm not usually one for talking to strangers, but he seemed nice. He was about my age, with sparkling hazel eyes and a bright smile. He was cute, I was single, and hey, technically this was a bachelorette party. I'm Laura, I told him. Rowan. He gave me another smile. We made small talk for a bit, and the subject of our camp's invader came up. Sounds like a mountain lion, he said. What do you mean? It doesn't seem like it was a bear, and they can climb, so that might have been how it reached the bag. I didn't see anything that looked like a mountain lion, I said. That's the thing. Rowan looked more serious now. A mountain lion will only be seen when it wants to be seen. If it's out in the open, you're safe. It doesn't want to hurt you. If you can't see it, that's when you know you're in danger. My skin prickled. I opened my mouth to reply but was interrupted by the sudden arrival of the rest of my group. Who's your friend? One of them hollered to me. Rowan waved and then turned to me. I've had a really nice time getting to know you. Would you want to meet for dinner tonight? I know it's a bit of a long shot, but yes, I replied a little too quickly. I was the bookish girl, the quiet girl. I wasn't the kind of girl who was asked on dates by charismatic, handsome men on faraway beaches. I'd love to. Great. Rowan gave me the location of one of the restaurants in the park, and we made plans to meet up. In the background, I could see my friends teasing me, and I blushed. Laura, and it gushed after he packed up. I'm so excited for you. We needed something to make this trip a little more spicy. I swatted her on the arm playfully. It's not like that. Nothing's going to happen. Where would we even find the privacy? You never know, she said, sing-song. I rolled my eyes and helped my friends with the rest of their canoes before we returned to camp. I didn't have much to wear to dinner, just a plain white t-shirt and a pair of khaki green hiking pants. It's not like I had planned to meet someone out here, but Rowan didn't seem to care. He was absolutely charming. At dinner, and we laughed like a pair of hyenas over a bottle of Cabernet and plates of Italian food. I was shocked, honestly, at the quality of food in the park, and dazzled at the way he treated me. Flirty, but not pushy. Funny, but not annoying. By the end of his evening, he invited me back to his campsite. Tipsy, I said yes. It wasn't that far from mine, maybe half a mile away, situated higher along the mountain, separated by a series of switchback trails that crisscrossed through trees and the remnants of rock slides. In the distance, I could see other fires and hear other voices, but to me, it felt like the only people in the world were me and Rowan. We cuddled on a log next to his campfire, the night surprisingly brisk. I'm a little cold, I said to Rowan, doing my best to bat my eyelashes at him. Do you want a sleeping bag? He asked, a mischievous tone in his voice. I nodded and stood, doing my best to keep myself steady after the wine. I can get it. I tried to sound flirty and walked to his tent, hoping he'd follow. His voice was rough. Laura, wait. I unzipped the flap, and in the sleeping bag, there was unmistakably a woman asleep. Her auburn hair was silky smooth and fanned out around her like a halo. My heart dropped into my chest. I turned, blazing, face red and hot with embarrassment. You had a girlfriend with you this whole time," I roared. My limbs were shaking. The haziness from the alcohol was gone. Rowan held his hands up in a gesture of appeasement. "It's not. This is a misunderstanding. She isn't. She wasn't. I don't give a fuck." I backed away from him, trudging towards the path that would take me to my own campsite. I can't believe I fell for it. He called after me and I started running, tears in my eyes. Of course he was some weird player or a swinger or something. How could I have been so naive? Did she know? She had to have heard us. He kept yelling my name, but I didn't turn back. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw him standing in his camp, but this quickly faded from view. I just kept going into the now dark forest, upset, wanting to put as much space between myself and that liar as possible. I couldn't see anything. I didn't have a flashlight. I just kept going. I heard coyotes, wind in the branches, an owl, snuffling, the gentle footfalls of something trying not to be heard. I scrambled for my phone. There wasn't any service, but I could use the light. I slowed. Annette told me not to run from a predatory animal. It triggers their instinct to chase. Again, my voice failed me, but this time I saw something. A shadow against a tree, a flash of movement. Something was there, and if I could see it, it could see me. My phone light, I realized briefly, was just a beacon to whatever was following me. I turned it off, trying to slow my breathing. My lungs hitched, and I tried not to cry. I wasn't on a trail. I didn't know where I was. And now that I was listening, now that I was quieter, I noticed. Whatever it was, whatever was following me, it was matching each breath from mine, so I wouldn't know it was there. Panic overtook me and I once again took off into the woods, dodging boulders and trees only guided by the faint light of the stars. I was fast, I was athletic, but I couldn't keep going forever. I was tired and had only had fitful sleep for several nights in a row. My body was protesting. With a burning in my chest, I decided my best course of action would be to scramble up a tree. The branches of redwoods are thin and pliable, able to hold up my weight but ideally not strong enough to withstand whatever was hot on my trail. Ignoring chips of bark underneath my nails and the scraping of wood against my hands, I hauled myself up, fueled by a wild adrenaline, ignoring the fact I couldn't tell how high off of the ground I was. I could still hear it down there, crashing through the forest at first, before again slowing to a creep. Looking for me, it was so dark. I could only see the outline of the thing, vast and looming, menacing. I held my breath. I waited. I couldn't tell what was movement and what was illusion. My brain filled in information that my eyes couldn't see. Everything was something and it was nothing. I waited in that tree until morning, until I was sure what I could see was there and that nothing would be lurking in the dark. My hands were cramped and my body ached, but slowly I lowered myself back to the ground. Luckily, I had kicked up so many pine needles and so much dirt that in the bright of day, finding my way back to the trail was fairly simple. Finding my way back to my friends and our campsite was harder, but I did it. Hours of hiking, drinking from streams, asking strangers for maps, but I did it. I felt near the point of collapse when I finally got there. I must have looked like a mess. I was dirty and bloody. I had been crying in frustration and fear. My hair was tangled, but I was relieved to be back, until I saw there were strangers in our camp. I finally found my voice. Hello. 6 faces turned to me, 4 familiar, 2 unknown. Annette rushed over and scooped me into a hug. She pulled away for a moment, searching my eyes. I noticed it looked like she had been crying, too. Annette pulled me back into another hug. We thought, oh my God, Laura, we thought you were dead. I wiped a tear from her face. I'm sorry, I said. I got lost, leaving Rowan's camp after dinner. He was a scumbag. I should have just stayed with you guys. Annette was wide-eyed. No, you don't understand. The police showed up. The 2 newcomers approached me, men in sharp uniforms with solemn voices. Police officers. Ma'am, we're sure this is all very distressing to you, one of them said, but we need you to identify someone for us. Have you seen a man by the name of David Michael Whittle? He held up a photograph of a handsome, 20-something man. Of course I recognized him. He told me his name was Rowan. We went on a date last night. Is this individual familiar at all? He held up a second picture, a dreamy auburn-haired woman with a slight smile. Sure, that's his girlfriend, or wife, or whatever. She was asleep in his camp. Why? The officer looked grim. I hate to tell you this, but this is an employee of the park by the name of Alexis Fletcher. She's been missing for about a week. "The man we are looking for, the man you had seen, was the last person Alexis was seen speaking with. He was a customer of the coffee shop she worked at. She had told her boss he had asked her to meet him after she got off her shift. You couldn't have seen her sleeping. I wanted to throw up, but I did. She was in his sleeping bag." Laura, the officer, said, "This man, David Michael Whittle, Rowan, he's been on our radar for a while. He is a very dangerous man. I'm not saying you didn't see her. I'm saying she couldn't have been asleep. We found her body a few hours ago. She had been murdered yesterday morning." There was something off about Max as he came back. Popping into view between the pines and coming to join us on the trail, there was a rigidness to his step, a tension in his body that made him look like some puppet played by strings. He paused for a moment to glance back over his shoulder and into the woods as if to scan his surroundings before getting back on track. The rest of the group was mired in conversation and small talk, so no one seemed to notice the oddity of his movements as he joined the pack. His face was expressionless as he came by my side, and just as silent, despite the rocky terrain he had just traversed. Not a huff nor a puff escaped his lungs. I suddenly felt a chill at the back of my neck as our eyes met, and I spoke up with unease, "Max, you alright there, man?" He stood still for a moment, that same blank expression on his face before a sudden smile drew across it. It was like someone was yanking at the sides of his mouth to force out the smirk. It was strained and every bit as wrong as his walk had been. He replied, with a voice that seemed to echo within, the movements of his mouth just barely not matching the words that came out, "I'm Prime, man. Let's get back to it. Yeah, Prime. Now that's a word you don't hear many say outside of math class." I was about to respond when a sudden jerk pushed his body forwards and he joined the band that got right back on marching. Busy talking, no one bothered to do more than glance back and really take a look at him. No one except for me. It was maybe 15 minutes of walking later. Max was silent as he kept pace along the edge of the group, dragging his right foot behind him as he moved with that same jerky and uncanny motion. No one seemed to pay him much attention as they talked, the conversation flowing from subject to subject as easy as the wind. We came to a halt once again as Josh went into the tree line to take a piss. There was a general chorus of huffing and groaning as he disappeared between the foliage. Only Max kept silent, eyes locked onto Josh, following him with jerky motions of his neck. That was when I thought I heard something from deep in the woods behind me, a sudden rustling in the underbrush as movement cut through the darkness. I could just barely make out some kind of shape moving far off within the woods, illuminated by the occasional rays of moonlight that broke through the canopies. The forest has gone quiet, but for the chatter behind me, nothing but the gentle rush of wind as the birds and insects fell silent. Max was gone by the time I turned back around to see what the boys were up to. Daniel, Jack, Nick, and Logan were all standing side by side, talking about some TV show. I can't recall exactly. Everyone was in their place but for Max and Josh. I was just about to ask Daniel where Max had gone when another sound came from the tree line, and Josh appeared from behind a boulder. A ray of moonlight was upon his face so I could see that familiar blank expression that stretched across it. The same jerky motions seemed to pull and push his limbs to and from as one foot dragged behind. That same unnatural smile drew across his face as he stepped onto the dirt trail and met my gaze. He raised one rigid hand to wave when I heard a whisper in the woods behind me once again. It was Max, standing at the edge of the trail behind me. He too had a smile plastered on his face as he stared in my direction. 50 yards behind him, a couple of bushes were rustling at the edge of the tree line. By all accounts, he had traveled that distance in the split second between when I'd heard the noise and when I turned around to face him. I was mouthing out a startled hello when he walked past me and joined Nick and Jack, throwing an arm around the ladder as the pack got to walking again. Much of the stiffness had disappeared from his movements and his words sounded almost natural as he spoke, and I listened in from the side. Yet, he spoke only in yes and no, and his mouth still didn't manage to move quite right when you looked at it for long enough. Josh, on the other hand, was a mirror image of Max from earlier, sudden and jerky in his steps and dragging a foot behind as he moved. somehow noticed by no one but me. We had already come into view of the campsite a couple of minutes later. I was by Jack's side, eyeing Max and Josh as I walked. The forest had grown quieter still as we had approached the campsite, even the wind seeming to die in the air. The lake lay visible at the side of the trail, through a sparse line of willows that marked its shore. It too had gone quiet, the gentle sloshing of waves replaced by a surface eerily still, reflecting the full moon like a perfect mirror. The conversation was plentiful, but all I could hear was the sound of Josh pacing a few meters behind me, the sound of his foot dragging across the dirt. It seemed to get closer if I didn't look over my shoulder for long enough. Every time I glanced back, he would be looking away. Every time I looked away, his eyes would whip around and lock right onto my back at the edge of my vision. That damn crooked smile would stretch across his face when I tried talking to him. He would answer with that echoing voice. Turning away, I tapped Jack on the shoulder, feeling those eyes digging into my back. Hey bro, I don't know if this is, weird to ask, but you think Max has been acting a little strange? He paused for a couple of moments at the question, glancing to his right where Nick, Daniel, and Max were arguing over video game balance. Max seemed mostly silent, looking off into the tree line between his short words and nods. Jack replied, "Nah, man, it's not weird, but there isn't really anything wrong with him, I don't think." He turned towards the trio again before continuing. "I don't know, maybe he's walking a little weird, but he hit his ankle around the pond earlier, right?" Unsatisfied, I nodded and was turning away to face forwards when something caught my eye. It was Max, his dead eyes staring right into my own. I shook my head and quickly looked away. I could feel two sets of eyes watching me as we arrived at the campsite. The fire was blazing in the fire pit as we held out our marshmallows over the flames, watching them char and melt into the sticks. Josh was sitting in front of me, going back and forth between staring up at the stars and losing his gaze in the fire pit. To my left, there was Max, eating his marshmallow with sudden fierce bites as if it was raw meat, and not fluffy sugar he was biting into. All around, the boys were tired from a long day's march, huddling around the fire in a cozy and intimate kind of silence, unaware of the strangeness in the air. I broke it by addressing Josh. "Yo dude, you remember that time we snuck a raccoon into the admin's room? When was that shit?" "It was." I gave a tiny pause, pretending to be trying to remember as I waited to see if he would say something. "It was 2 weeks or something before the midterms, right?" He softly nodded his head yes, looking up from the fire with that creepy smile. I continued, "Who was that guy they pinned it on, anyway? They said they'd seen him on a security camera snooping around the time of the crime or some bullshit like that." I smiled at him between sentences and he mirrored it, his uncanny smirk widening to match my own, mechanically, as if on a prompt. "What was his name?" "Oh yes, it was Tony Elkins, that Indiana kid." Giving a forced chuckle, he repeated after me, "Oh yes, it was Tony Elkins, that Indiana kid." I gave him one last smile before turning away to pretend to look at the lake. Really, I was facing away to hide the fear that I felt creeping up from my stomach and into my face. There had been no raccoon incident, and there certainly hadn't been no Tony Elkins from Indiana. I finally let myself admit the gut-wrenching truth. Whoever was sitting across from me was not my friend Josh, and whatever was pretending to be Max was not really Max. It's strange how mundanely the impossible becomes reality. One moment the world makes sense, simple and ordinary like everyday life, the next, it's all changed. All the while, nothing's really changed. The stars still shine in the night sky and the ground is still solid beneath your feet. Yet, really, it all has. Suddenly, there's just a little more to everything, a secret to every corner. Suddenly, there's no end to the universe. I caught Josh's eyes staring into me when I turned back. Eyes that were like two black holes piercing through the dancing flame between us. Daniel, Nick, Logan, and Jack were all calmly eating their marshmallows, unthinking, and hazy like in a dream. They were talking of games and girls, of schools and jobs. None of them saw the silent panic in my eyes. I then turned my attention towards Max. His marshmallow branch was twisting in his hand in a jagged motion. His fingers were both snappy and completely lethargic in their movements, clumsy like a left hand trying to write. His marshmallow was a melty, gooey ball of sugar as he lifted it straight out of the fire and popped it into his mouth. I'm pretty sure I heard the spit in his mouth sizzle on contact. He made no reaction. Watching him chew on the marshmallow, I noticed that his stubble was gone. His face, shaggy and unkempt mere hours before, suddenly spotless. I looked down to see that his arms were just as bare. In the shine of the flame, I noticed something else that sent shivers down my spine. His skin was wrong. It looked like plastic, pulled taut over his bones. There was matte finish to his flesh, almost sanded over, that was unlike any person that I'd ever seen. His skin was rubber. Despite myself, I reached forward to touch it, my arm trembling as silence seemed to weigh down on everything. My fingers brushed past his forearm. He felt like spandex against my touch, stretching like gum beneath my hand. Looking up and meeting his gaze, I saw the hollow of his eyes, a darkness in his pupils raging inside, about to burst open into a dark flame. I think I saw a tremor starting on the arm I was touching, something akin to an earthquake approaching from within, when Nick interrupted, "Well, you ladies have fun and enjoy the fire. I'm gonna head out and gather some more firewood." Max's arm was pulled away when I turned back around, his eyes suddenly calm, staring into the stars. I watched Nick slowly walk away from the fire and into the tree line, lit by the summer moonlight. Panic raged through me as I watched him disappear into the woods. In a sudden motion, I grabbed a flashlight and shot up to my feet. "I'm gonna go take a piss, you guys. Try not to miss me too much." The eyes of Josh and Max watched me as I first went behind a boulder at the edge of the campsite, and then followed Nick's entry into the woods. You don't really understand the darkness that lurks within forests at night until you've seen it with your own eyes. Under the cover of the canopies, it starts getting dark the moment the sun descends onto its afternoon arc. The air shifts suddenly as the shadows grow long and crooked. It is practically night around 4 p.m., and it only gets darker from there. By the time the moon is out and shining, the forest is a pitch black that flashlights can scarcely even shine through. The branches of the trees were like a deep ocean as I looked for Nick, swallowing the flashlight's glow, so it reached only a few yards ahead. I was following the faint sound of footsteps that echoed from somewhere in front of me. I pursued the noise silently, not daring to call out to my friend as the weight of the forest's silence seemed to bear down on me. I had been walking for maybe only a minute, but it had felt like hours in the maze of the trees. That was when I heard it. "Help," a voice called out meekly from a clearing that opened up before me. It was Max's voice, repeating that same word over and over again like a broken record, identical each and every time. I approached the edge of the clearing where I saw Nick. He was maybe 15 meters to my left, walking on the grass towards the opposite side of the clearing from where the pleas echoed. "Help," the voice called out one last time as the pleading came to a stop. The air seemed to hold its breath as the forest skipped a heartbeat and everything stood in silence. Nick came to a sudden halt in the middle of the clearing, staring, straining his eyes to see something at the edge of the tree line. The quiet stretched on as dread built up in my guts, a hollowness from deep within as my subconscious prepared for something terrible. It was a man in khaki shorts and a red t-shirt that appeared. The moonlight was cast upon his face, its head, really, for it had no face. Featureless and smooth like rubber, he had the synthetic no face of a mannequin. He raised an arm, jerking it with the suddenness of a string that had snapped. He waved, so snappy in its motion that it felt like my eyes were skipping frames. He put one leg forward and then another, moving in a broken motion that could scarcely be considered walking. Nick was frozen in place, as was I, watching the thing approach my friend. 10 yards away, and then 9, 8 yards away, and then maybe only 7. The creature seemed to move in slow motion, an inevitable calamity. It grabbed Nick by the shoulders as my friend suddenly seemed to break away from his trance. He struggled against the thing's grip, but it was to no avail. It held him in place effortlessly with one hand, clasped over his shoulder like an iron vice. That was when Nick started screaming. They were distorted, horrible shrieks as his shoulder blade crunched between the creature's fingers. His head whipped around frantically, eyes wide with terror as he looked for anything that could help him. His eyes met mine as his face spun in my direction. He started shouting in between his wails of pain, "Matt, Matt." That was when the creature clasped its other hand over his mouth. His shouting and screaming fell to a muffled murmur as it forced Nick to face itself. He struggled, jerking his head left and right, trying to avoid its gaze. Yet, slowly, the creature made him look. Nick tried to clench his eyes shut for a few moments, hoping against everything that it would all just go away. The thing patiently waited, its no face staring into him. As he finally opened his eyes, I saw a crease forming at the sides of its head, then running from ear to ear as something shifted underneath its latex skin. The crease slowly opened up as the top and bottom of the mimic's head separated. A gaping maw appeared, revealing an abyss surrounded by rows of iron teeth protruding up from its charcoal gums. That's when Nick started screaming again, his wails growing louder, breaking through the creature's clasped hand. His eyes widened, as did the thing's mouth, growing as large as golf balls in his panic. His legs shook down below and kicked away at the thing, powerless to do anything as its iron grip held him in place. All the while, the thing's mouth just kept widening. It had just about split its head in two when it came to a stop with a springy click. The world, once again, seemed to skip a heartbeat right then. All was silent for a moment, like the stars above. Looking into the thing's mouth, I could see that the abyss inside was lit up. It was like the night sky, mesmerizing and infinite, as a billion stars spun in the void. Nick, too, appeared peaceful for a moment as he looked into his killer's maw. That was when the jaws closed. It happened too fast for my eye to register. One moment it was open and then it wasn't anymore. Nick's body convulsed for a few moments as the creature grinded its teeth against one another, crunching as he chewed through the spine. Nick's limp body met the ground with a hollow thud. A wet sloshing painted the ground as blood poured out from where his head had been. The creature cocked its head back before swallowing Nick. Its throat bulged, stretching like plastic as my friend's head traveled down into its stomach. A few moments had passed when it started convulsing, shivers running up and down its body as it seemed to seize. Its face was blurring, moving and shifting beneath the skin as a face seemed to take shape. First, it was a knot-like nose that rose to the surface, and then two hollows that slowly turned into eyes. Its flesh rippled in waves, as its clothes too changed shape in oscillations of color like a chameleon. It took only a minute, and then it was done. It had become Nick. It shuddered one last time, skin bulging and collapsing before he settled into its final shape. It got to walking then, startling me out of the horrified trance I had fallen into. I stumbled back and fell into a bed of bushes, my heart skipping a beat as the rustling of the leaves blew past the silence. I saw my friend's face whip in my direction. It took a couple of rigid paces forward, pausing by an old weathered-looking pine trunk. The moonlight was cast from behind him, hiding his face in shadows as I looked at him through the leaves. He paused for a moment or maybe an hour, it was hard to tell. My heart beat against my chest like a hammer as the blood echoes against my eardrums. I clenched my eyes shut, preparing to feel its death grip grab me by the shoulder when I heard his feet shift. His neck jerked around and his legs started leading him back to our campsite. Nick's headless body lay against the ground, slowly gushing blood through his esophagus. It dangled with the steady flow of the blood, shining underneath the moonlight. It was only Max and Nick around the fire by the time I mustered up the courage to find my way back to the campsite. Their faces were cast in shifting shades of orange and red, the flames dancing in the reflection of their eyes. Max was sitting on a cooler with a log to his side, and on the log, the key to Daniel's pickup truck. He seemed even livelier than before, tossing and catching a marshmallow in the air as I approached and sat on a log to his side. He greeted me jovially. "Matt, my man, how long you been pissing for, dude? You got prostate cancer or something?" He laughed at his own joke, catching the marshmallow before popping it into his mouth. He smiled as he chewed on it, and I gave him a meek nod. As I looked at him then, all I could see were those jaws closing around Nick's neck. Looking over the fire at his mimic, I could almost see how its body would look with its head missing, how the blood would be gushing, shining crimson in the firelight. Forcing myself to look away, I swallowed hard before turning towards Max and speaking up. "So, where's everyone gone, man? They ain't gotten snatched up by some fucking Sasquatch." I hope the forced chuckle felt horrible as it came out of my mouth, leaving me feeling exposed on all sides. These things weren't stupid, right? They must have known that I knew. They were just toying with me, leading me along until a jaw would suddenly shut around my neck. Matching my chuckle, Max laughed. "Nah, man, Josh just took them out to gather firewood." He looked over to Nick. "Big guy over here apparently came up with nothing." Nick looked up from the fire, his face stretched with that uncanny smile. "Yeah, man, my bad. They'll find some for sure." The silence hung in the air again as chilly winds washed ashore from the lake. Staring into the fire, I could see them eyeing one another with furtive looks. In between the cracks of the fire, I thought I could hear silent mutterings coming from their mouths. bells, strange clicking sounds unlike any human language. I felt exposed like a lone tree atop a wind-swept hill, death blowing around me with the wind, surrounding me from every angle. The firelight was shining on the metal of the keychain, dancing and tempting. Fear felt tight at the back of my throat like a scream that wanted to escape. I pushed it down and got onto my feet. I'm gonna get myself a Coke from the car. You guys want anything or nah? Nick's head snapped up as I walked behind Max, eyeing the keys to his side. I was reaching down to get them when I felt him grip my arm. He was looking up at me, face split between the flames and the shadows of the night. The smile on his face had none of the uncanniness it had had before. The inhumanity of it was replaced by an evil that felt much too human instead. He spoke, "Why don't you sit down, Matty boy?" His hand felt like iron around my wrist as he dragged me back down to my seat. Nick was sitting upright on his log, as straight as an arrow, as he watched with a hunger that could have devoured worlds whole. I let out a long sigh, a sudden upwell of emotions rising from deep within me. Tears slowly trickled down my face as I looked back up to meet Max's hollow eyes. "You aren't gonna let me go, are you?" That's when I saw a crease forming at the edge of his mouth, stretching from ear to ear as his face started to blur. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see the same thing happening to my right. I had pretty much resigned myself to my fate when I saw it. A single red axe dug into a log between me and Nick. The fire shined upon its silver edge as it glowed as my last hope. The stars were showing between Max's teeth already, a fractal painting of nebulae in the plane of the galaxy. I felt almost at ease then, staring into that death. I thought of the late nights I would spend on the roof of my grandfather's farmhouse. I remembered how peaceful the wind had been, brushing past my face like the comets did the sky. For a moment, death felt like coming home. It was a metallic click that broke me out of my trance as Max's head snapped back. With a courage that seemed to swell out of thin air, I lunged for the axe and felt the handle between my hands. The world fell to silence. All I knew was the wood against my hand as the weight of the metal rushed through the air. The world seemed to spin, the wind rushing past as the axe met my foe. With a loud crunch, the blade lodged itself into Max's neck. A black, tar-like liquid rushed out of the wound as I let go of the weapon and it swayed in the air, sticking out of the dark flesh. His gaping maw slowly closed as his body fell off of the log and met the ground with a thud. The black blood pooled on the ground and flowed against his face as he lay dead, his blank expression double with its reflection upon the liquid's surface. Sound slowly returned to the world. As I turned away, the wind suddenly seemed loud as it blew by my ears and carried with it the death stench of the newly felled corpse. The axe suddenly felt as light as a feather in my hand, as adrenaline finally caught on to what was happening and rushed through my veins. My heart was beating against my chest so hard, I could feel veins bulging in my neck. Nick was to my right, frozen mid-bite as it realized what had just happened. With a sudden clicking sound, his plastic skin undulated, his body shaking as he lunged up at me. His hand struck just a few inches from my leg, biting into a log, crushing the wood like it had been made from cardboard. Jumping away, I yanked that axe free from the mimic's corpse and raised it over my head, bringing it down on his elbow. It broke clean off with a crunch as black liquid gushed from the newly formed stump. The clicking sound from before turned into an animal wailing that threatened to burst my eardrums. His sawed-off hand was still moving, dragging itself across the first in my direction, leaving a trail of black in its wake. Stepping backwards, I squashed it like a bug as the mimic won once again. It whipped through the air, scraping by my torso, marking my back with a dark, burning wound. I brought the axe down on its shoulder, separating its good arm from its body. Its wound seemed to squirm as its muscle fibers slithered over one another like dark worms. The creature lunged again, blood spraying from its gaping wounds. A streak of it hit my face as he swung the stump in my direction. I caught it midair with a swing of the axe, connecting to its torso with a wet thud. He collapsed on top of me as we came tumbling down on the grass. Yanking the axe free from its chest, I shoved it beneath its jaw, ramming the handle across its throat as jaws tried to bite down. Gone was the night sky between them, only the abyss remaining in the mimic's mouth. Despite its two missing hands, the creature's strength was immense, and its jaws were creeping closer and closer to my face, its drool dropping down on my face, burning my skin on contact. Jerking its head downwards, it bit off the tip of my nose, tearing it away in an instant with its jagged teeth. The pain was blinding, nearly breaking my grip on the handle. Holding the axe with one arm against the creature's onslaught, I reached out with my right hand in desperation, grasping for anything that could save me. I could feel its breath, like death itself, wafting down from its mouth, stinging my eyes as its mouth opened and closed inches from my face, and my hand found purchase on a rock. With the last of my strength, I brought it to the mimic's head, ramming it against its head over and over again. Wet thuds gave way to a hollow banging which slowly turned to crunches as I cracked its skull. Its maw was wide open, wrapped around my head at last, a split second from closing around my face when my final blow brought it down to the ground. I laid there for a few moments before the growing pool of its dark blood touched my face and jolted me upright, burning like acid. Both mimics lay dead by my side, soaked in blood, shining with the light of the dying flame. The adrenaline had mostly worn off by the time I got to the car. It was a strange calmness driving through the pines, with death mere minutes in my past. It was maybe an hour later that I'd reached the edge of the national park. That's when it all came back crashing down. I got out of the car and fell down onto the dirt, clutching my stomach as its contents spilled on the road. I fell away from my sickness and collapsed on the ground by the pickup side. The crunch of bones as the axe had met the creatures, the sound of flesh tearing as the mimic chewed on Nick's neck. That damn smile as Max came back from the woods and joined us on the trail. It all played through my mind at 100 miles an hour as I lay down, looking up at the stars. Despite everything that had happened, they shined on like they always had and always would, silent and eternal in their celestial seats. I laid there for maybe half an hour, letting the night sky calm me before a sound from the forest woke me back up. I listened in close, looking deep into that forest that held death inside. Meek sounding and seeming to echo, it was a help that came from between the pines. A moment later, the sound was multiplied all around me as the forest boomed with noise. Staggering back to the pickup, I grabbed a flashlight from the passenger seat. Slowly, I shined it across the tree line. There were hundreds of them, standing at the edge of the forest. Their no faces shined smooth with the light as my trembling hands led the flashlight from left to right. Their arms shot up to their sides, waving all in unison. They took a step forward, creeping closer from all directions when I ran back into the car. I heard their steps coming closer and closer as I fumbled with the keys against the ignition. I pressed down on the gas with all my might as the engine roared to life. I drove away, and on that night, the sun was poking up from between the mountains as I pulled into a motel. I had survived. It's been years now that this tale has been in my past. Sometimes I'll see something out of the corner of my eye as I'm driving on the interstate, maybe a meek voice from between the pines. Maybe it'll be just in my head, but I'll know to look away and drive on. If there's anything you take away from this tale, let it be just that. If, for whatever reason, you should find yourself face to face with something without a face, asking for help, don't be a good Samaritan. Just walk on and away. Walk on and you may just live to tell the tale. Thank you to my superfans, Sweet Black Swan, Tacy, and Brooklyn. I really appreciate you guys supporting my channel, and I look forward to making more content for everyone.